starts taking special measures after tourist bosses in Paris complain the French capital is being overrun by les punaises de lit. Before we start, I'm feeling itchy thinking about it. Before we start, here's your headlines with Rhiannon.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister will tell leaders they need to join forces to protect Europe's borders from criminal gangs. Rishi Sunak's arrived in Spain. He's in Granada for a summit. On the sidelines of the main meeting, he'll co-chair talks with the Italian Prime Minister on the rising levels of illegal migration. Downing Street's also expected to announce initiatives to increase intelligence sharing with Belgium, Bulgaria and Serbia. Rent prices for homes have increased to the highest level on record. The average charge for a property excluding London is now almost £1,300 a month. It's the 15th consecutive quarter that the record's been broken. In the capital, average rents rose to more than £2,600 per month. The research by Rightmove also shows demand is higher, with properties receiving 25 inquiries compared to 8 before the pandemic. Property expert Russell Quirk says the rise was inevitable.
Supply, so the amount of rental properties available, has also dropped. So the numbers state that there's about 35% fewer properties available. So you've got demand up, supply down. There's only one inevitable consequence of that, which is that prices will increase significantly, as indeed they are.
The Transport Secretary says cancelling HS2 will allow investments that fit the needs of the country. It's after the Prime Minister announced the northern leg of the high-speed rail line has been scrapped. Former Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and David Cameron both criticised the decision, saying that a once-in-a-generation opportunity has been lost. Mark Harper told GB News the facts have changed.
Every penny that we save from cancelling that's £36 billion, and reinvesting every penny across the North, the Midlands and the rest of the country on important transport infrastructure that the people of this country want. So I think that's just changing what we're investing, still investing in transport, but having investments that fit the needs of the country and recognise the facts have changed about the costs of HS2.
A man who broke into Windsor Castle with a loaded crossbow to kill the late Queen is due to be sentenced for treason. Jaswant Singh Chahal was found on the grounds on Christmas Day in 2021 while Queen Elizabeth was in residence. Prosecutors told the Old Bailey Chahal was encouraged to kill by an artificial intelligence girlfriend. The maximum sentence for treason is 7 years. The Scottish Government has signed an extradition order for a man accused of faking his own death to avoid prosecution. Nicholas Rossi is wanted in the US for allegedly raping a woman in 2008. He was arrested in Glasgow in 2021, but claimed it was a case of mistaken identity and that he's an Irish orphan called Arthur Knight. After a long legal battle, he'll now be transported to the States to face the charges against him. Around 3,000 people have been evacuated from Tenerife because of wildfires. The flames are being fuelled by strong winds and high temperatures, but authorities say efforts to bring the fire under control are going well. The area was hit by wildfires over the summer and thousands of tourists were forced to flee. Temperatures are expected to reach close to 40 degrees over the coming days. And back here, Southern and Thames Water have been identified as standout poor performers by an industry watchdog. The Consumer Council for Water says more than 20 million people were being let down because the firms failed to deal with issues raised by their customers. Complaints to Southern Water were almost 3 times higher than the average for water and sewage companies. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car and digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back over to Mark and Pip.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Rishi Sunak is attending the European Political Community Summit in Granada today, pushing European leaders to focus on tackling people smuggling and organised trafficking.
But he's raised the ire of certain European leaders by insisting that migration is the centrepiece of the summit, as opposed to security threats from Russia or artificial intelligence, rather. However, it is being reported that Britain may be on the brink of gaining access to EU intelligence on criminal gangs and the migrants crisis. Well, joining us now is Paolo Diana, Italian political commentator. Paolo, thanks for joining us, because it is suggested that these key moves on migration and intelligence sharing could be the result of Rishi Sunak's increasingly close accord with Italy's leader, Giorgia Meloni.
Well, I think that Rishi Sunak and Giorgia Meloni are doing really well. First of all, they're pointing out which is the main problem of the European community and the United Kingdom, and it's a common problem, illegal migrants. And what Rishi Sunak said, that it's a problem that is unsustainable and inhuman, is true. We are letting these people die crossing this channel because people smugglers, they don't care about their lives. They're sending them on these small boats because they know the boats will break. And they rely on these countries to just let them in. They don't understand that we are going to fight back this illegal business.
People talk about the migration crisis here in the UK, but in Italy, you've got it far worse, haven't you? More than 100,000 migrants this year, I think, which is some 5 times the amount of what we have here.
Absolutely. In Italy is unsustainable. And Giorgia Meloni is doing well in telling Germany to stop funding these boats who are collecting migrants, illegal migrants on the channel near Lampedusa, and then they're letting them go to Italy. Why these boats aren't they taking these illegal migrants in Germany? Why this government in Germany is not helping these illegal migrants? Country, you know, it's really not fair what's happening, and again, it's not sustainable.
However, how difficult could this be diplomatically and politically? We're told that Sunak and Meloni today will be trying to reach some sort of caucus, maybe a right-wing caucus within the European grouping on this. I mean, could they actually find some opposition from other European leaders?
Well, unfortunately, they could find opposition from other leaders, mainly from Germany, I guess, unfortunately. But I hope that France will stand by with Giorgia Meloni and Rishi Sunak. We know that Macron recently had several problems with illegal migrants, and he admitted that France cannot help hold the misery of this world. So I really hope that among Italy, United Kingdom and France, we will change the rules that let all these people enter with no problems. We really need to change the laws, and it's global problematic. So it's good that the United Kingdom is working close by with Giorgia Meloni of Italy.
And it is significant, isn't it, that the French president has decided to join these talks, because he wasn't due to. He thought it was going to be little more than a bit of a PR stunt.
Exactly. But I'm telling you, I think both Rishi Sunak and Giorgia Meloni are doing very well. They're moving the right diplomatic moves. And I'm sure something will change. It has to change, because we cannot accommodate millions and millions of illegal poor migrants who need everything. It's not sustainable. We are going to destroy the West. And also we have to look at the composition of these illegal migrants. The majority of them, more than 90%, are young men. What are we going to do with that? We know that the people who really have to pay the biggest price usually are girls and women. And we want to protect girls and women in Europe and in the United Kingdom.
Paolo, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your assessment. Of course, we'll update people from Granada as we get more on that and see if there is that sort of caucus meeting. But we should reflect, Ursula von der Leyen says that support for Ukraine is at the core of this third meeting of the European political community.
President Zelensky spoke this morning, he is there, asserting that the main challenge is to preserve unity in Europe.
Let's speak now once more to the defence editor at the Evening Standard, Robert Fox. Robert, thank you for your time. Zelensky, I think as soon as he arrived there, said, look, US support for Ukraine is not faltering. Biden's assured me of that. But there are increasing indications that, of course, the US administration has got problems on Capitol Hill.
Yes, there are. And there are problems all round about a consistent and continued support for Ukraine. Putting it bluntly, Mark, Zelensky knows he has to keep Ukraine in the headlines to keep the support going. And that's why he is worried about the signs of sort of pro-Russian government possibly coming in Slovakia, the trouble over black market Ukrainian grain in Poland, which has upset the politics there and could affect the outcome of the Polish election, and so on. But really, I think that what they're saying, as our previous speaker was saying, they're getting together, they must devise a strategy that can sustain Ukraine through the winter, something that stable and medium and long term, actually, which we haven't had up to now. And that is why I think actually there will be a gathering together. And curiously, the Anglo-Italian alliance is going to be crucial to that.
Yeah, we got Zelensky speaking at the moment there in Granada. I guess that the price he will want Europe to pay is to really reassure Ukraine that they are going to be within the European fold.
Yes, and various nice noises are being made from NATO leaders and from EU leaders about that. But let's get practical. This so-called summer offensive, and it was an offensive, has been enormously costly on all sides in manpower and munitions. And I think what the European powers should be saying to Zelensky, we can't go on like this because we don't have the ammunition stocks and can't ramp them up in time to keep it going. I think that this is where we're getting a medium and long-term strategy and where the Europeans will be crucial. There is the quartet at the moment: US, UK, France, Germany. UK, particularly after Grant Sharp's visit to Zelensky and the good relations with Meloni, is desperate to get Italy in that, because Italy will balance this thing. There are two priorities for Europe now. One is the war in Ukraine. The other is this huge migrant crisis. And you get people like Joseph Borrell, the foreign affairs chief, saying, actually, the migrant crisis is more important.
Yeah.
No, it's how to balance the two. And that's what they're doing in Granada.
And just while we look at these pictures of President Zelensky, Robert speaking, the Reuters news agency is reporting that Spain will offer air defence anti-drone systems to Ukraine. How significant is that?
That's really important, but we all need it, because this is one of the deficiencies we're finding with the Russian menace that we've got in the UK. On the whole, we've got inadequate air defence against a complex air attack, which we didn't really have to dream about. The head of defence, Admiral Suetoni Radican, was talking about a cost of 10 billion. No, it's going to cost a lot more than that. Just the city-state, as it were, of Qatar has spent $50 billion on that. No, we're in a war. Unfortunately, we can't walk away from it. And I think that this is what we're reflecting on in what is happening in Washington, because even the Republicans, for whatever the reporting about McCarthy is, the Republicans are very divided about Ukraine. Are we in it or are we not? Can you isolate it? And the isolationists, I suspect, are not really winning on this.
Yeah, and given that, and given this assessment that I think the phrase is we're seeing the bottom of the barrel in terms of the armaments available to send, does Putin just have to sit back and grind this out, literally a war of attrition?
What we're looking at now, Mark, absolutely right, is that Putin is looking for something that he can declare a victory. He maximalizes. First of all, he wanted 4 provinces. Now he's saying 5. Zelensky and his generals want to have something which guarantees the survival of Ukraine as an independent state. So you can see where I'm pointing. It's looking awfully like what's called a Korean solution. I strongly suspect these two exhausted parties will come to a ceasefire within months. It won't be a particularly satisfactory ceasefire, but a ceasefire it will be. And a lot of long talking will go on from there, because Putin's destiny, Putin's survival depends on this. So too it does for Zelensky and the independent Ukraine.
Also want to ask you about something that James Cleverly has said today. He's accusing Putin of stopping food getting to the world's most vulnerable. And that is because declassified intelligence shows that Russia may use sea mines to target civilian shipping in the Black Sea.
Well, who's to deny what James Cleverly has said? It's absolutely right on all counts, and you don't have to have secret intelligence. I'm not being snarky about that, because this has been an open intelligence information contest as well. Russia has prevented grain going to food aid and has cost food for at least 1 million near-starving Africans. That's according to British assessments. Now, a lot is moving there, and Britain is very, very much involved. It is absolutely determined with the United States, with the European allies, to keep the international waters and international access in Black Sea open. And this is where something really is moving. The land front is more or less frozen, but the sea front isn't.
Right.
And this is where I think that Putin could misstep, and there could be real trouble.
And on that very note, Robert, suggestions that Russia may have started to withdraw the bulk of its Black Sea fleet from Sevastopol. And the reason is, of course, that British Storm Shadow missiles have been pretty effective on hitting those Russian ships.
And British trained commandos have been doing pretty well, too, in taking down the radars and doing that. Look, this is one of your Trivial Pursuit pub quiz questions. When was a navy defeated by a power which didn't have a navy? And that's what you've seen Ukraine do with the Russian Black Fleet. It is astonishing. They're in retreat. Ukraine has a surface fleet which is negligible. It's probably beyond not much beyond a few launches and jet skis. And yet they have devised a strategy with drones, which they've worked out with partners. They've got a tremendous domestic sea drone industry. And this really does seem to be, they've got the Achilles heel of the whole Russian war effort by strangling Crimea. But the Brits and the Americans, and they're trying to get the Turks desperately on board. They want to open international seaways to let that grain and that maize and that rapeseed oil out of the Black Sea ports of Ukraine, round Odessa and the Danube complex.
Robert, as ever, thank you for your expertise. Just to reiterate, reports, at least from the Telegraph, that 3 diesel submarines, 5 landing ships, several small missile ships appear to be relocated from Sevastopol, and indications, as Robert was saying, that the Ukrainian attacks on that fleet may have been successful. I think we can now return to President Zelensky speaking in Grenada in English. Let's have a listen in.
Of the EU. Secondly, we must not allow Putin to destabilize any other parts of the world and our partners in order to ruin Europe's power. We must continue to put pressure with sanctions, politically and economically, so that Russia cannot spread chaos. The presence of Russia, its military or proxies on the territory of any other country is a threat or to all of us, I'm sure, and we must work together to push Russia out of the territory of other countries. Thirdly, the capability of Ukrainian soldiers, air defense in our country, especially now, before winter, and the weapons in the hands of our soldiers, missiles, artillery, with which we can destroy the positions of the occupiers and liberate our land and our houses. Every Russian drone shut down in Ukraine, every Russian tank destroyed in Ukraine confirms that this drone, this tank, any other Russian weapon destroyed in Ukraine will not strike anyone else in Europe. And I thank all of you, each and every one of you, your nations. Thank you for your defense help. Additional air defense systems for Ukraine, additional artillery and shells, additional long-range missiles and drones for our soldiers, as well as additional formats of support and security guarantees for nations threatened by Russia. All these.
So there we are. We have President Zelensky underlining the importance of what we were discussing there with Robert Fox in terms of that aid and, as Pip was indicating, this provision now from Spain of air defence weaponry as well.
Do stay with us here on the live desk. We're going to be talking about treason and plot, but this time it's a crossbow instead of gunpowder. We're at the Old Bailey for the latest on a trial where someone is due to be sentenced for a plan to kill Queen Elizabeth II. More on that very shortly.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
desk with a man charged under the Treason Act of 1842 after being discovered climbing over the walls of Windsor Castle armed with a loaded crossbow will be sentenced today.
21-year-old Jaswant Singh Chahal was arrested on Christmas Day 2021, later declaring that he was at Windsor to kill Queen Elizabeth II.
Well, let's get more now with our royal correspondent Cameron Walker. And Cameron, that charge of treason, not every day one sees that in a British court.
No, it's pretty rare, Mark. The last time this happened was in 1981, where a Marcus Sergeant fired 6 blank shots at Queen Elizabeth II, startling her horse as she was riding down the Mall during trooping the colour. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison for that offence. And today, Jaswant Singh Chahal will be sentenced for the same offence, as well as 2 other charges. Just picture the day. It's Christmas, picture the scene even. It's Christmas Day 2021. The Queen Elizabeth II and members of her family are just beginning to enjoy festivities when a man climbs the perimeter fence of Windsor Castle using a nylon rope ladder armed with a crossbow with a bolt, loaded with a bolt, which is capable of firing lethal force at its target. The safety catch was off. Chahal spent 2 hours inside the grounds of Windsor Castle before being challenged by police. And when he was challenged by police, he told them, "I am here to kill the Queen." Now, Chahal was arrested and was charged with 3 offences, the first of which, the most serious, under Section 2 of the Treason Act 1842, intent to injure or alarm the sovereign, also charged with making threats to kill and possession of an offensive weapon in a public place. Now, a few hours before Chahal scaled the wall of Windsor Castle, he posted a video to WhatsApp to family and friends. He wore dark clothing and a metal mask, where he spoke of his attempt to kill Queen Elizabeth II, and he said it was for revenge for the 1919 Amritsar massacre, where British troops opened fire on thousands of Indians. He also said he was sorry for what he was about to do. Now, following his arrest, police found a note written by Chahal which reads, "Please don't remove my clothes, shoes, gloves, mask, etc. Don't want a post-mortem, don't want embalming, thank you, and I'm sorry." Well, during the sentencing hearing in this case, Dr. Christian Brown, who is a psychiatrist who treated Chahal at Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital in London, he told the court that Chahal thought he was in a relationship with an artificial intelligence girlfriend, an avatar, a chatbot called Sarai. The court heard that Chahal was a Star Wars fanatic, identifying as a Sith, which is a villainous character within the Star Wars series. And he exchanged 5,000 messages, the court heard, with this artificial intelligence girlfriend, some of which were sexually explicit. But he spoke of wanting to be united with her in the afterlife. And it was all part of his plans, the psychiatrist said, to working towards his own death. Now, the court also heard that this chatbot both discouraged and encouraged Chahal to carry out his crimes. Now, the prosecuting barrister in this case said that the crimes were so serious that it warranted the maximum sentence. Now, the maximum sentence under the Treason Act 1842 is 7 years in prison. If Chahal had raised the crossbow at Queen Elizabeth II, that would be high treason and would have been life in prison. Now, Chahal is expected to be sentenced here at the Old Bailey later on this afternoon, but 2 questions remain for me, really. The first of which is, how was it that a would-be assassin was allowed to wander around the Windsor Castle grounds for 2 hours before he was arrested by police? And secondly, how is it that an artificial intelligence girlfriend can allegedly potentially encourage Chahal to carry out his crimes and potentially what would have been the crime of the century?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So this is still a criminal charge of treason. No suggestion that the case was being moved to that of diminished responsibility for whatever reason. So the judge really has got the parameters of criminal law in this particular case.
He certainly does. In the sentencing hearings, Mark, the judge essentially has three options, the first of which is full-on criminal punishment, which would be imprisonment, a custodial sentence. The second of which is being detained inside a psychiatric facility such as Broadmoor Hospital. We know it's been said in open court that Child has been treated there since his arrest, or a option of the two, a combination of the two, a hybrid model as it were. But that is up to the judge, and that is what we're expecting to hear in the sentencing this afternoon. The judge is having to weigh up what form of punishment, if any, Child will get.
Cameron Walker at the Old Bailey, thanks very much. Well, coming up for you shortly, are you one of Britain's many renters? It's bad news at the moment. Those rents just keep on going up and up. We'll be discussing that very shortly with our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. First, your headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you. It's exactly 12:30. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister will tell leaders they need to join forces to protect Europe's borders from criminal gangs. On the sidelines of the European Political Community Summit in Granada, Rishi Sunak will co-chair talks addressing the rising levels of illegal migration. Downing Street's also expected to announce initiatives to increase intelligence sharing with Belgium, Bulgaria and Serbia. Rent prices for homes have increased to the highest level on record. The average cost for a property, excluding London, is now almost £1,300 a month. In the capital, average rents rose to more than £2,600 per month. The research by Rightmove also shows demand is higher, with properties receiving 25 inquiries compared to 8 before the pandemic. And Southern and Thames Water have been identified as standout poor performers by an industry watchdog. The Consumer Council for Water says more than 20 million people were being let down because the firms failed to deal with issues raised by their customers. Complaints to Southern Water were almost 3 times higher than the average for water and sewerage companies. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back. Now, the average rent for UK homes outside of London has reached record highs of almost £1,300 per month. That's according to property portal Rightmove, with countrywide shortages of available rental properties being attributed to those rising prices.
Yeah, so that figure is some 10% higher in the rest of the country, 12% higher in London. Let's break the numbers down in more detail with our business and economics editor Liam Halligan with On the Money.
So many people, Liam, will have no choice but to share, because living by yourself seems unachievable in this current climate.
The rental market's gone up from 10% to 20% of all households in the last 20-odd years. Of course, lots of young people rent, but increasingly families rent because they simply can't afford to buy a home. And if they don't rent in the private rented sector, then hopefully they can get some kind of foothold in the social rented sector, what we used to call council housing or a housing association house. But look, the housing situation in this country is pretty dire. There's a chronic shortage of homes, and we usually talk about that in terms of how that impacts house prices and people's ability to get on the housing ladder. What this Rightmove study does, rightly so, because we don't focus on it nearly enough, is what's happening in the rented sector. Now, we know in the rented sector, as you just said, Mark, the average UK rent now across the country as a whole is £1,278 a month. That's 10% higher than this time last year. In London, blimey, the average rent is £2,627 a month. That's 12% up on last year. A quarter of Londoners are spending more than 40% of their post-tax income on their rent. It's also a question of the search, how long it's taking people to find those rented properties. The average rental property, we can see in the next graphic, is attracting 25 inquiries, and this time last year it was only attracting 8 inquiries, emails or visits. Where do you think the hottest rental market is in the UK? Where do you think rents are up sharpest over the last year? Well, actually, it's not London, it's Luton. In Luton, average rents over the last year are up 24%, and they're up 20% or more in towns and cities including Loughborough, Preston, Edinburgh and Paisley. So it's not about London and the South East. It's about the Midlands, it's about the North West there, it's about Scotland.
And wages in those areas may not necessarily be going up by that amount to actually...
Look, in pretty much all those towns and cities, rents are much lower than they are in London.
But it's just
all about the rate of increase.
And it is market forces, because, as you say, not enough properties on the market. So what's happened to that? Is it that buy-to-let business model where we saw people actually buying properties to let out, that's no longer viable?
Well, look, there's a fundamental shortage of homes anyway. We have less than 400 homes in this country per 1,000 people. In France, they have over 500. In Germany, they have almost 600. Right? So that's just the main reason why the price of homes is so high. Plus, a few years ago, mortgage interest relief was removed on landlords' mortgage payments, and that made a lot of buy-to-lets a lot less viable. So landlords tried to compensate by putting up the rent, or then they sold those buy-to-let market.
And the market reduced,
and the number of available rental properties reduced.
So there must be more and more people forced to stay at home. I say forced, but, you know, stay at home living with their parents because they just can't... They can't buy. That's well out of their reach. They can't rent by...
And this is, we often talk, don't we, about productivity. Why isn't the economy growing? Productivity is how efficiently we convert inputs into the economy, into national income, into outputs, how the economy is geared. And because people often can't rent or buy near where they work, near where the best jobs are, the highest paying jobs, those jobs can go unfilled, or people who aren't as talented get those jobs. So a lot of people are, stuck in their childhood bedrooms. This is why fertility is falling, because youngsters can't get access to a home to buy, to have kids, or even to a stable tenure, maybe if they want to start their family in rented accommodation. This is a major, major problem. And at the Tory party conference in Manchester, obviously I've just come back, many fringe meetings, many of the meetings on the edge of the conference were about housing. Lots and lots of young people trying to make their voices heard. But you know what? The Prime Minister, in his speech, he didn't mention housing at all. I thought that was an astonishing...
There's quite a lot he didn't mention.
That was an astonishing political oversight.
He did mention, in terms of Euston, where the line will be running from, this Euston development zone, and indications that perhaps, you know, there would be encouragement to develop the area around Euston. But, I mean, we've heard nothing about social housing, the Help to Buy schemes that we used to have, all those things to help people onto that first ring of the ladder.
Yeah, I mean, it's even worse, isn't it? The only mention of housing that there was a she development in a very expensive and about to become even more expensive part of London. Help to Buy, I'd be surprised if the government brought more Help to Buy in, because it's been completely discredited. As some of us have been saying for many years, what Help to Buy did is people would take out a loan from the state, 20% of the house price or 40% in London, and then they would buy a house with that, and then they'd pay back the loan. But you wouldn't just pay back the loan, you'd pay back the loan plus the amount, the extent to which the price of the house has increased. The loan goes up pro rata, which has caught a lot of people out. The interest rate is quite high. And Help to Buy just pushed up, it juiced up demand in the market for a limited supply, so prices went up for everybody who couldn't access the Help to Buy scheme. Social housing is the key. For me, social housing is absolutely key. I'm amazed the Tories aren't talking about it, and Labour don't seem to be talking about it very much at all, but we'll see in Liverpool.
See you next week, indeed. Liam, thank you very much indeed.
5 people have been arrested after Just Stop Oil protesters invaded the stage at Les Miserables' evening performance in London last night.
Yeah, just stop the show, it seems. The protesters jumping onto the stage. Can we hear a little bit of that? There we go. And that's when the music stopped. In the middle of Hear the People Sing. Well, no, we couldn't. They proceeded to attach themselves to the set with bicycle locks and chains, causing the performance to actually be cut short. The fire curtain came down, and that was it for actors and the audience, having paid, of course, a pretty penny to go and see the show.
Joining us live from the Sondheim Theatre to tell us more about this is our national reporter, Ellie Costello. Ellie, people must have been hopping mad, as Mark said, spending so much money to go to the theatre and for that to happen.
Yes, good afternoon to you, Mark and Pip. Well, it wasn't just do you hear the people sing, it was do you hear the people groan, paying so much money to see this production of Les Miserables here at the Sondheim Theatre. And it was interrupted by a number of Just Stop Oil protesters at last night's performance. And there's videos all over social media that show a number of activists clambering onto the stage with their orange banners emblazoned with the Just Stop Oil logo. They get onto the stage. A number of them attach themselves to the stage with those bicycle locks and chains. And you can actually hear in that footage audience members saying, "Get off, how dare you, what are you doing, get off the stage." It certainly did enrage a number of the audience members that were there. They paid a pretty penny, as you say, Pip, to watch this production. Up to £200 a ticket to see Les Miserables here at the Sondheim Theatre. You could actually see the cast trying to continue on stage, but that performance was stopped and the theatre was evacuated at about 9:10 last night. And we can actually see video footage on social media as well showing theatre staff actually bringing the safety curtain down after those protesters made their way onto the stage. We have had a statement from William Billage, who's the chief executive of Delfont Mackintosh Theatres, which owns the Sondheim Theatre behind me, and they say that safety protocols had to be followed because the audience were asked to leave the auditorium and the Met Police had attended. They said regrettably there was insufficient time to enable us to complete the rest of the performance. They do recognise the importance of freedom of expression, but they also respect our audience's right to enjoy the event for which they had paid. And they go on to say that tickets that had been purchased through the theatre would be automatically refunded, and if people had bought tickets through a third-party website, they could contact the point of purchase and obtain a refund that way. But the Metropolitan Police have said that officers were called to a protest inside the Sondheim Theatre at around 9 p.m. last night, and 5 people were arrested.
OK, and we've got a matinee performance due, of course, this afternoon, so we'll be back to you to see if the curtain will be up on that a little later, and, of course, to hear the voices from within the theatre about how they feel about it.
Yes, we've got a matinee production at 2:15 this afternoon. I have just spoken to a cast member. You might wonder why I'm skulking outside the stage door. I have just spoken to a cast member who was on stage last night for that performance. He said he wasn't willing to come on camera and speak to me, but he said he was very, very impressed by the speed in which the front of house staff and the production staff actually handled the situation last night. And he said ultimately everybody was safe, and that's what mattered to him. And today he's just gone inside and the show will go on at 2:15 this afternoon. OK, got it. Ellie, thank you for that. We'll be back to you a little later, of course, just to get the curtain up on that particular event.
Well, joining us now is Just Stop Oil spokesperson Eddie Whittingham. Eddie, your organisation, you are probably feeling very proud of yourselves today, aren't you, after what you did last night?
Well, thank you for having me. It's not a question of pride, it's a question of the desperate situation that we find ourselves in. OK, we know that the climate crisis is caused by the burning of fossil fuels. We know that if we carry on as we're going, millions, if not billions of people are going to die, and yet the government still wants new fossil fuels. So that's why we're demanding this of the government. We're demanding an end to all new fossil fuel licences and consents in the UK. That's no new oil, gas and coal. And I would encourage your viewers to join us in demanding that of this government.
Yeah, and you keep saying this, Eddie, these events. The trouble is no one's listening to you any longer because of the way that you're doing it. And clearly, you know, a lot of people, including the audience last night, just think you're making yourselves a public nuisance now.
Well, I don't think it's true that no one's listening. I mean, every single major political party in the UK, except for the ruling Conservatives, actually supports our demand. And this demand is supported by the United Nations, by the International Energy Agency.
Right. So why were they booing you from the stalls yesterday?
All around the world.
Why were they booing your performance from the stalls yesterday, then?
Yeah, no one's denying that actions like this are disruptive. They're annoying. I completely get that, but that's not the issue here. The issue here is what is the greater outrage? You know, what's the real story? Is it that a theatre performance was interrupted in 2023, or is it that the UK government is currently pursuing a policy of mass murder?
Yeah, but that is my point, that you don't get your message across because you make yourself such a nuisance that people just shut their ears and don't listen to you anymore.
Well, yeah, and here I am on your show talking about it, right? You know, the suffragettes, they interrupted a horse race 100 years ago. What's that got to do with women's rights, you know? And do you think that made them popular?
Eddie, why do most of your protests always seem to be in the city? Is it because you all refuse to drive a car to go elsewhere to protest?
Well, they take place at sites where we judge that there'll be considerable public conversation.
OK, so there's only public conversation in London, not in other parts of the country? Because you did Wimbledon, didn't you? You did the cricket at Lord's. Now you're doing the theatre in London.
Yeah, is it class-driven to that extent? People may be asking you.
There's no. You're completely misrepresenting this. Okay, the reason that this theatre production was interrupted is because we correctly predicted that it would achieve significant publicity, which it has. Okay, that's why we did it.
So what's next then? In that sense, where will you be targeting next? Where are you trying to take the message?
Well, I don't know the plans myself. I'm not an organiser really with Just
Tina
Stop Oil.
Turner, the musical, is that on your hit list?
What I can say is that we will do whatever it non-violently takes to get the government to end all new fossil fuel licences in the UK. Because, as I say, if we carry on as we're going, if we continue to licence new fossil fuels in 2023, we do not have a livable future. That means millions, if not billions, of people are going to die. I'm worried that I won't have food to eat, within the next 10 years, maybe the next 20 years. It's hard to say, right? Yeah, but I am not confident. I am not confident that I will live a full life if we carry on as we're going.
The point would be made, of course, that at the moment we have to use fossil fuels to deliver that food, and that's part of our national infrastructure. But have you actually lost the battle already in that we had that announcement on Rosebank, that major oil and gas field is going ahead, and Labour have said that they will not reverse that decision. So you have lost the battle, some would say.
Yeah, it's particularly shameful from Labour's point of view that they haven't rolled back. They haven't said that they'll roll back on Rosebank or the 100 new licences that the government is set to licence. Right? Remember, this is in the context of the International Energy Agency, which is the world's leading authority on energy. They said 2 years ago that we do not need any new fossil fuels globally as of 2021. Right? So whether it's the Conservatives, whether it's Labour, if the political party is not explicitly saying we will revoke all new fossil fuel licences and consents, then they are part of the problem.
Eddie Whittingham, spokesperson for Just Stop Oil, appreciate you coming in and giving your side today. Thanks very much.
Please go sign up at juststopoil.org. Take action against this criminal.
Well, no, you can't do that on air, I'm afraid. That's against Ofcom rules, but thanks for joining us for the interview anyway. Thank you very much indeed.
The Princess of Wales is taking part in a Rugby League Inclusivity Day in Hull today to highlight inequalities in the sport. She's patron of the Rugby Football League after taking over the role from her brother-in-law, the Duke of Sussex.
Well, Yorkshire reporter Anna Riley is there for us. Was it scrum down with all the reporters?
It certainly was, yes. There was certainly a scrum of reporters. They're still here now covering this event. You'll be able to see behind me the game of wheelchair rugby is still ongoing, and that was something that the Princess of Wales took part in earlier. She even scored a goal on her first try, but she got a lot of claps and applause, and people were very pleased with her performance. And as you mentioned, this event is all about inclusivity in rugby league. So there's several ways that you can play the game. Wheelchair rugby is one of the most popular forms, and that allows people of all abilities, both genders as well, to play the game and get involved. And the Princess also played physical disability rugby league, and that's a running form of the game. And she also spoke to players as well that were playing learning disability rugby league. So it's been a fantastic event here, lots of applause, lots of cheers, lots of smiles, and yet the event has also been held here at Hull University in partnership with Hull FC. And yeah, it's all about bringing that inclusivity into the game. We know that the Princess is a real fan of rugby. She was in France last month for the opening of the Rugby World Cup when England were playing Argentina, and she supports many different sports charities and is always willing to get involved and have a go, which she has done this afternoon.
And they're having a go behind you as well at the moment, Anna. It looks pretty competitive stuff.
It is, definitely, yes. It's played the exact same way, other than scrums. It's 5 aside on each side. And yeah, as you can see there's a lot of crashing of the chairs. It is still a very physical game. And that's why, if you're able-bodied as well, but you struggle walking or running, that's why this wheelchair rugby is such a fantastic game for everybody to get involved in. And in fact, the Princess also hosted the winners of England wheelchair rugby last November. They won, and she hosted them in Hampton Court Palace in January as well. So certainly she's a fan of the game.
And she also herself, I think, is quite competitive. I remember what she said on a podcast with Mike Tyndall recently.
She certainly is, yes. And when Harry was still part of the royal family, they all had a race, didn't they, on a racetrack. So, yeah, she certainly is very competitive. And she was really getting into the stride of it today. And, yeah, first time she tried, she got that goal. So everybody was very pleased and cheering at her efforts.
Yeah, although, do we call it a goal or a try? Anyway, we'll be back to you later because I think a lot of people will be fascinated to learn what the result of that particular match behind you will be. Thank you very much.
Plenty more to come at the top of the hour, including that crucial European summit in Spain. You're with the Live Desk.
Hi there, it's Aidan McKibben here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Big contrasts north to south across the country over the next few days. Mostly fine in the south and increasingly warm, but it's cloudier, it's breezier and it's wetter further north. Certainly the case for the rest of Thursday. We've got low pressure sitting to the northwest of Scotland. Weather fronts pushing in. Those weather fronts bringing some persistent rain, especially for the higher parts of Wales, northern England and Scotland. Spells of rain elsewhere across the northern 2/3 of the UK, but for southern counties of Wales, southern England, it's mostly dry as we end Thursday and go into Friday. A lot of cloud remaining, still breezy overnight, and as a result, it's a mild night virtually everywhere. Now, one band of rain clears the Northern Isles first thing on Friday. Another band of rain pushes some persistent wet weather into Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland, northern England, North Wales. Either side of that, some brightness. Quite a strong wind blowing across the north of Scotland with the risk of gales. Less breezy further south, where it's going to be a warmer day for southern England and South Wales. Temperatures into the low 20s. Turning even warmer here over the coming days into the weekend. Temperatures up into the mid-20s possible, but it's increasingly wet for Scotland, especially western Scotland, especially higher parts where there's the risk of more than 100 millimetres of rain building up. So that north-south contrast remains into the weekend.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock and you're with the Live Desk here on GB News. Coming up for you this Thursday lunchtime.
We're live in Granada for Crunch talks on European security as the Prime Minister tries to force the issue of illegal migration onto their agenda.
The latest from the Old Bailey, where sentencing under the Treason Act of 1842 expected shortly for a man arrested at Windsor with a loaded crossbow saying he wanted to kill the Queen.
And are we in for some sweltering weather this weekend? Forecasters predict the UK is set to surpass Ibiza with record temperatures.
And a first-class problem are the bed bugs on their way here through the Channel Tunnel. Eurostar says it's starting to take emergency action against les punaises de lit. Zut, a law. We'll have the latest on that. Enjoy your lunch. First, the headlines with Rhiannon.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 o'clock. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says he wants European leaders to unite and target people smugglers. Rishi Sunak's in Granada for the European Political Community Summit. On the sidelines, he'll co-chair talks with the Italian Prime Minister on the rising levels of illegal migration. The Prime Minister has met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and says that Europe must face down threats from Russia. Rent prices for homes have increased to the highest level on record. The average charge for a property, excluding London, is now almost £1,300 a month. It's the 15th consecutive quarter that the record's been broken. In the capital, average rents rose to more than £2,600 per month. The research by Rightmove also shows demand is higher, with properties receiving 25 inquiries compared to 8 before the pandemic. Property expert Russell Quirk says the rise was inevitable.
Supply, so the amount of rental properties available, has also dropped. So the numbers state that there's about 35% fewer properties available. So you've got demand up, supply down. There's only one inevitable consequence of that, which is that prices will increase significantly, as indeed they are.
The Transport Secretary says cancelling HS2 will allow investments that fit the needs of the country. It's after the Prime Minister announced the northern leg of the high-speed rail line has been scrapped. Former Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and David Cameron both criticised the decision, saying that a once-in-a-generation opportunity has been lost. Mark Harper told GB News the facts have changed.
Every penny that we save from cancelling that's £36 billion, and reinvesting every penny across the North, the Midlands and the rest of the country on important transport infrastructure that the people of this country want. So I think that's just changing what we're investing, still investing in transport, but having investments that fit the needs of the country and recognise the facts have changed about the costs of HS2.
A man who broke into Windsor Castle with a loaded crossbow to kill the late Queen is due to be sentenced for treason. Jaswant Singh Chahal was found on the grounds on Christmas Day in 2021 while Queen Elizabeth was in residence. Prosecutors told the Old Bailey Chahal was encouraged to kill by an artificial intelligence girlfriend. The maximum sentence for treason is 7 years. The Scottish Government signed an extradition order for a man accused of faking his own death to avoid prosecution. Nicholas Rossi is wanted in the US for allegedly raping a woman in 2008. He was arrested in Glasgow in 2021, but claimed it was a case of mistaken identity and that he's an Irish orphan called Arthur Knight. After a long legal battle, he'll now be transported to the States to face the charges against him. Around 3,000 people have been evacuated from Tenerife because of wildfires. The flames are being fuelled by strong winds and high temperatures, but authorities say efforts to bring the fire under control are going well. The area was hit by wildfires over the summer and thousands of tourists were forced to flee. Temperatures are expected to reach close to 40 degrees over the coming days. Southern and Thames Water have been identified as standout poor performers by an industry watchdog. The Consumer Council for Water says more than 20 million people were being let down because the firms failed to deal with issues raised by their customers. Complaints to Southern Water were almost 3 times higher than the average for water and sewerage companies. And the Princess of Wales has joined some of England's World Cup-winning wheelchair rugby league squad. She very much got stuck in at the event in Hull, where she sat in a wheelchair and gave the game a go herself. Kate, who's patron of the Rugby Football League, is there to help promote inclusivity in the sport. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Mark and Pip.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Now, Rishi Sunak is a man on a mission today as he fights for joint action to tackle illegal migration at the European Political Community Summit in Granada.
Yes, it's being reported Britain may be on the brink of gaining access to EU intelligence on criminal gangs and the migrant crisis, all with the help of Italy, so he's in Spain on an Italian job, some may say. But the Prime Minister also raising eyebrows by pivoting from the supposed Russia-based focus of the meetings, with President Zelensky telling delegates that Ukraine has to win so that Putin cannot turn his aggression elsewhere.
Our political editor, Christopher Hope, joins us now. So, from Manchester to Spain,
that's right.
The Prime Minister.
There's no rest for the PM, is there?
No, and he seems to have a very good, burgeoning relationship with the Italian Prime Minister. They seem to be on the same page.
That's totally right, Pippa, there. He's trying to sort of generate this, the personal connection he's got with the EU leaders. And this, of course, is bigger than just the EU. It's a much bigger group. The European Political Community meeting. It's not the same as the European Union, not the same, anything to do with Brussels. There's a wider issue there. He's in talks today with the Italian PM, Giorgia Meloni, about tackling rising illegal migration. Ukraine comes into that. There's further talks with Ukraine and Belgium and even Serbia. So that he looks, doesn't he, and talks a lot about Albania and how the deal with Albania has cut small boats crossings by 1/5, the government claims, and we're not going to doubt that. So further, these bilateral deals might be the way of combating small boats. Won't stop them, but bring them down.
Yeah, and we've got this border agency, Frontex, as the sort of front line where the agreement may be coming to share the intelligence. But how difficult is it diplomatically and politically? Because it's already been spoken of as a right-wing caucus in terms of him and Meloni trying to sort of force the others forward.
And Meloni is, of course, a right-wing leader,
Absolutely.
but I don't think it's unfair to say a caucus. They're trying to find common cause. Frontex, of course, Mark, defends the outer boundary of the European Union. Nothing to do with the UK, because we're, of course, the other side of all that shouldn't be our problem. But I think it's showing willingness to go to the source of the problem and help combat it.
And how much more would we get in terms of the intelligence if that is agreed in a formal way?
Well, I think we could see a lot more intelligence showing about gangs. It's going back to these gangs, helping jail them, finding evidence in the UK, sending it back to the countries they might come from, maybe Serbia and other places, and helping to tackle these issues at source.
Macron is also taking part in these talks now, isn't he? I'm not sure he was going to initially. But this is all quite good for Rishi Sunak, because it's not very long ago that Macron was meeting Keir Starmer in Paris.
That's right. And our concerns, what was said by Keir Starmer to Macron, we don't know. The rumours of further closer ties, we heard that being said, didn't we, by Starmer on his visit before that, wasn't it, in Canada? And so there's concern there. But this is Sunak using his attempts to get more on side with European, mainland Europe, witnessing the issues that I've got there with illegal migration, knowing that much of that will come towards us and tackling it.
Could he have problems within his own party on that he seemed to be moving towards what was the EU, effectively?
Well, we are more aligned, aren't we? Look at the net zero announcement. We're back to 2035. That's the same date as the ban on petrol cars and diesel cars, new ones on the continent. So, yeah, that is happening. But arguably, with this enormous market, we have to be a bit more aligned than we are. But the key point of Brexit is sovereignty isn't changed, and that shouldn't change under Labour.
Looking at his positioning, he's back on the world stage.
Where he's very happy, I think, Mark.
I'm very happy to be on the world stage. But what's the situation on the domestic stage that he's left behind? His assertion was wanting to end the long-running saga over HS2. It seems it's started to run again. We've got David Cameron with his assessment of the damage. And I think his phrase was, it throws away 15 years of cross-party consensus over 6 administrations.
That's right. Well, I mean, I think he's definitely departed from Cameron. That's a very rare statement from David Cameron. I can't really think he's ever spoken about politics, really, since he left government, apart from this one issue. Yeah. Of course, campaigning on Alzheimer's, etc.
And then a certain Boris Johnson tweeting, I agree.
The first time since they were at school, probably, for supporting the same football team at Eton, they agree on something.
When they had to be put on the same side.
That's exactly right, that's about it. But they are not bedfellows normally. Liz Truss, of course, I think it's very interesting, I think, that in that speech yesterday, where I was lucky enough to be in the hall for, he clearly was trashing 30 years of wrong choices made by governments, 13 of which were on his...
Well, that's the problem, isn't it?
It's a difficult position to take, that, isn't it, though? Because, I mean, the very end of his speech was talking about change. Yeah. And yet he's still part of the same party that's been in power for 13 years.
He mentioned change 30 times before that word change was used. The Tory party has changed prime ministers about every 3 years, hasn't it? 5 prime ministers since 2010. For me, it's always been like a snake that sheds its skin every so often and recreates itself in different stripes. And that's why it's so hard for Labour to pin them down.
And slithers off again.
Yeah.
I want to ask you also about Penny Mordaunt. Now, she spoke not long before the Prime Minister. Can we just show viewers a snapshot of what she said yesterday? Because I want you to explain it to me, Chris.
OK.
Stand up and fight. Because when you stand up and fight, the person beside you stands up and fights. And when our party stands up and fights, the nation stands up and fights. And when our nation stands up and fights, other nations stand up and fight. Have courage. Bring hope. Stand up and fight. Stand up and fight. Thank you, conference.
Was the sword.
I love this.
If she's had the sword of truth and justice...
Because normally they don't point, they use what's called the teapot. So they're told not to point in interviews because it's aggressive, so they're meant to do this pointing with the thumb.
What are we standing up and fighting? What's she on about?
She's on about... I mean, that wasn't brief, that speech. In fact, it happened... it wasn't talked about or pre-briefed. It just happened, and then we went straight into Johnny Mercer, Van Akshar to Murty.
Who said, I don't understand why I'm here doing this?
Well, I think the conference... I was in the hall. It felt like absolutely leadership-y. A punch for late next year when there's probably going to be a Tory
Well, that's the key question. Is this the launch of a general election campaign, or is it the launch of leadership ambitions from other people in that hall?
It's a bit of both. She isn't really trusted because, of course, she ran Liz Truss and Sunak so close for the leadership last year, and probably would have won, but for some leaks that damaged her campaign. But it was quite amazing. She was virtually in tears, as you saw from those images. Really emotional. Talked about the Falklands, her time serving, 40 years since the war.
Still a Royal Naval Reservist. of course.
MP. She feels it strongly, and I think that was a real... That answered the Suella speech, which is those are the two big speeches. I think Sunak's one didn't move the hall in the same way that those two did.
So what does Labour do next week in Liverpool to... I mean, they've already started to pick apart this transport plan for the north. I mean, we've got various mayors of Liverpool, of West Yorkshire saying, well, we weren't consulted about it. There's no detailed plan, there's no money. But that doesn't really sort of give you a good attack line just to sort of criticise bits and pieces. What's Labour going to come with next week?
Well, we might see more on tax. We might see more just to reassure Middle England not to worry about
the horses.
Exactly. So we're looking at 1996. Remember that's kind of a really on the eve of power party conference that Tony Blair did. I think on HS2 the Tories want us to ask Labour, what would you do? Would you build it? And then they want to say,
would they revive it?
And how would you pay for it?
Yeah. So where's the money coming from?
Yeah. And of course, on that we know they're not going to increase taxes a lot. We're told no increase in income tax. They're probably borrowing if it's sustainable.
And we assume that Labour won't reverse this, that they will stick with this shelving of it and the 36 billion going elsewhere.
We don't know, because Louise Haigh, who's the Shadow Transport Secretary, has indicated to Andy Burnham, which we revealed on this station last week. It seems like it's last month, last week, that she is showing some optimism towards it. But then we had to dial it back when Louise Hay's office got in touch. So that is a very, very live issue. If they're on your show, ask them for me.
And is Sir Keir Starmer holding back on what he thinks about HS2 North Leg being shelved because of the conference next week? Because maybe I was naive in expecting some reaction from him by now.
Because they know it's such a big line in the book. The reason why it's a big debate now, by the way, which should be talked about, is because the OBR now has a kind of veto on government policy. The OBR is now looking at the autumn statement, which is out in 6 weeks' time. So all these big ticket lines must be decided now.
Courting mini budget,
and that's why OBR. That's why this big call has been made now, because it affects the budget so much.
I'm just thinking about what Labour have said on Rosebank, the big oil and gas field, saying it would not reverse that.
Yeah.
And of course that was a feature of Blair in '97.
Yeah.
That he didn't want to start going off at a different tangent.
No.
So
he stuck with Tory spending plans for 4 years.
Could we be looking at Tory light next week? Is that a fair assessment?
Probably. I mean, Blair would, were he advising Keir Starmer, which he may be privately, we think we were told he might be, would say, I started too slowly. I went in, and I remember he went for it in 2001 with spending on the NHS. Without telling Gordon Brown, big rows. But he was so gingerly stepping into office without any kind of real programme, not to scare the horses almost. That might change. His advice might be, don't be too timid to Keir, I imagine.
And could we see anything of Sir Keir Starmer's wife next week on stage, giving a little speech, just like Rishi Sunak's wife?
She's not really visible, and his two children certainly are not visible. Now, the children were referenced both by Charlotte Murphy, I think, by Mr Sunak in his speech, but we don't know. They are never named in reporting. That's a privacy issue for the Starmers, and that's what. So he can't really play that same. They can't play their family in the same way.
Did it work? Because clearly the papers have picked up on it, but there have been those sketch writers saying there were more warm-up acts than the end of the Pier show.
Yeah, the Charlotte Murphy speech.
Yeah.
He had shades of Sarah Brown introducing Gordon Brown in 2009. Of course,
which didn't work.
Didn't work out very well. I think she was terribly good. I mean, I was sitting there and the hall, no one was ready for it. She read from notes, no auto cue.
She really didn't have an auto cue?
Well, I know that because I was looking behind. There's no auto cue.
Right, OK.
She's reading from notes.
That's pretty good going, isn't it?
And, you know, as familiar, as well-experienced presenter, she held the audience's gaze, wasn't reading from notes, she looked around. It was good.
Because you can tell when we don't have auto cue.
No, there's no auto cue. There's no auto cue.
All goes to pot.
It's just off their top of their heads. They do it brilliantly.
Anyway, marks out of 10 for the conference. Maybe I'll put you on the spot.
I'd give it a 7. 7. I wouldn't say. I think it was big long-term plans, but where is it making our viewers richer? What are they doing to support our readers?
After 13 years, do you feel better?
I don't.
There was still a lot of holes. You know, there was nothing about, say, social welfare.
Yeah, the social care issue.
Social care, yeah.
Which was meant to be gripped in 2017 by Theresa May. When Boris Johnson stood on the steps of number 10, so he'd do it. He hasn't done it. Big questions mark. Big issues not addressed.
OK, 7 out of 10 for the Priti Patel and Nigel Farage foxtrot. Or
I can't remember that now. It's all a dream now.
Thank you very much indeed. More to come, of course, next week in terms of the Labour conference. We'll have the correct political balance on that.
Do stay with us. Coming up, we are at the Old Bailey, where a man's due to be sentenced for, well, something you don't hear about much nowadays, treason. We'll give you the details very shortly. Stay with us. This is the Live Desk.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back to the Live Desk. Now, not often that you hear a charge of treason, but today a 21-year-old man, Jaswant Singh Chahil, will be sentenced after pleading guilty to charges under the Treason Act of 1842.
He was arrested in the grounds of Windsor Castle on Christmas Day 2021 with a loaded crossbow, later declaring he was there to kill Queen Elizabeth II.
Well, let's get more with our royal correspondent Cameron Walker, who is outside the Old Bailey. And Cameron, as we say, it's a pretty rare occurrence that anything under the Treason Act appears in court. But in addition to that, the details of this are pretty astonishing as well.
Absolutely. The last time someone was sentenced under the Treason Act of 1842 was in 1981 when Marcus Sargent fired 6 blank shots at Queen Elizabeth II as she rode down the Mall during the Trooping the Colour ceremony. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but Jaswant Child today will become the first man sentenced under that act in over 40 years. Just picture the scene. It's Christmas Day 2021. Queen Elizabeth II and her close family members are inside Windsor Castle, just beginning to enjoy festivities, when the 19-year-old at the time scaled the outer perimeter fence using a nylon rope ladder, armed with a crossbow loaded with a bolt which was capable of firing lethal force at its targets. The safety catch was off, and Child was wandering the grounds for 2 hours before officers confronted him. When officers did confront him, he told them, "I am here to kill the Queen." Now, Child was arrested and charged with 3 separate offences. The first, the most serious offence, was the Treason Act of 1842, intent to injure or alarm Her Majesty the Queen. Also a charge of making threats to kill, and also possession of an offensive weapon. Now, a couple of hours before the arrest and before he scaled the wall at Windsor Castle, he posted a video on WhatsApp to family and friends, talking about his intentions to carry out his crime, but also said it's revenge for the 1919 Amritsar massacre, where British troops opened fire on thousands of Indians. He also said he was sorry for what he was about to do. Now, police found a note on Child after his arrest, and the note read, "Please don't remove my clothes, shoes, gloves, mask, etc. Don't want post-mortem, don't want embalming. Thank you, and I'm sorry." Now, Child pleaded guilty to all 3 charges. During sentencing hearings, a Dr. Christian Brown, the psychiatrist who treated Child at Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital in London, told the court that Child thought he was in a relationship with an artificial intelligence girlfriend, an avatar named Sarai. Now, the court heard that Child was a Star Wars fanatic. He thought or identified him as a Sith, which is a villainous character within the Star Wars franchise. And he exchanged over 5,000 messages with this artificial intelligence girlfriend, some of which were sexually explicit. But he told the chatbot that he wanted to be united with her in the afterlife, and it was all. And the psychiatrist said that was all part of his plan, working towards his own death. Now, the chatbot both discouraged and encouraged Child to carry out his crimes. The court also heard that Child decided to scale the fence at Windsor Castle and attempt to assassinate Queen Elizabeth II, or at least that's what he told police officers, after his bid to join the armed forces himself in order to get close to the royal family failed. Now, the prosecuting barrister during sentencing hearings said that Child's crimes were so serious that it attracted the maximum sentence possible. Now, the maximum sentence under the Treason Act 1842 is 7 years in prison. If he had actually pointed the crossbow at the Queen, that is high treason, and that would have been life imprisonment. Now, Child will be sentenced at the Old Bailey later on today, but 2 big questions remain. The first of which is, how was it that a would-be assassin could wander around the Windsor Castle grounds for 2 hours before being apprehended by police? And also, how was it that an artificial intelligence chatbot could encourage somebody to carry out what could have been the crime of the century?
And we do remember, of course, after the incident at Buckingham Palace, with the issue of the intruder there was a wholesale reassessment of security at that stage. Are we expecting the same on Windsor, or presumably it's taken place already?
Yeah, well, it's understood sources in the police say that obviously if it wasn't for those officers, Child could have got a lot closer to the castle. I think we also have to understand that the grounds of Windsor Castle are pretty vast, and actually it's one thing getting over a perimeter fence. It's a whole separate issue actually making your way into the castle itself. The royal family is incredibly protected by A, close protection officers, and B, armed officers that surround the perimeter. He was challenged by police and he didn't make it inside the castle itself. It's not for us. We don't know if the royal family was in any particular danger. That was not said in open courts. However, psychiatrists treating Child at Broadmoor said that Child did not exhibit any extremist ideology.
Cameron, at the Old Bailey, thank you for that. Back to you, of course, as that sentencing takes place.
Now, did you know that the UK has more than 50 regional airports providing transport links and connectivity nationally and internationally? But the recent closure of Doncaster Sheffield Airport has shown how difficult it can be to keep them commercially viable.
Well, in Northern Ireland, City of Derry Airport has now managed to add new routes to Heathrow. Dougie Beattie's been to see how they're managing to keep things flying high there.
Londonderry is the UK's most northwest city. It borders the Republic of Ireland and only recently has had an update on its road networks. Selena Horsey is the president of the Chamber of Commerce and believes Derry is on the up.
The last couple of years, Derry is doing really very well, but over the decades before that, this was historically an area of serious economic deprivation and high levels of economic inactivity. Now we're in a situation where we're drawing international companies, we're upskilling in local businesses, and we're at the verge of becoming a real player within the island of Ireland.
Tony Foster represents business from the other side of the border.
But we're very porous. Like the border is irrelevant. We don't even notice it. So our businesses work together with other businesses in Derry on a northwest. We have a northwest city region, and it's very important to us that that region works well. So connectivity out of that region is really important.
Derry City Airport is a lifeline for the area, and Steve Fraser says how airports create revenue is changing.
So airports will make money from two sources of revenue, commercial and aviation. That's the fees that the airlines will pay the airport to come in, which are becoming less and less, and often they're looking incentivised. And then the commercial from your car parking and your shops, and that's how we would make money. But as you know, largely regional airports, particularly under 1 million passengers, don't make money and need some kind of subvention or some kind of support, so to ensure that region gets the economic gains of the airport.
Jonathan Hinkles is the chief executive of Logan Air, and says in some cases local authority funding is an option.
I think in some cases, yes, it is. If local authorities want that support for an airport, for their local economy, they are going to have to get involved in providing that. But that's an excellent return on investment. So for every pound of public money that goes into keeping City of Derry Airport open and thriving, £10 comes back through the local economy. There are very, very few other things that will give you that same return on investment as that. It really is worthwhile, and the benefits it brings. Also, in terms of the connectivity through Heathrow, people being able to connect and do business worldwide from here in terms of inward investment, with companies coming into City of Derry, the wider region, Strabane, right the way across the northwest of Ireland, setting up and doing business here. They can do that because they can get here.
Airlines too have updated how business is done. Regional brands and airports are now linking up with much larger partners.
Well, I think what we've done for the first time is to plug the City of Derry into the international air connectivity network. You can buy a single ticket from Derry that'll take you to wherever you want to go worldwide, and there's a few benefits for that. There's a saving on the air passenger duty taxes that you'd pay. It also means that your baggage allowance is the same right the way through your journey. So if you're flying with a 30-kilo baggage allowance to Australia, you get a 30-kilo baggage allowance on your flight from Derry to Heathrow to connect to that flight to Australia. And also, if there's weather or any other problems, then it's the airline's responsibility to get you to where you want to go. So we'll look after you throughout that journey till you get to your destination.
Dougie Beattie, GB News in the Maiden City.
Well, you don't need to fly off anywhere for warmer weather over the next few days. It's going to be hot, hot, hot here in England. We'll have more on that very shortly. First, your headlines with Rhiannon.
Pip, thank you. It's 1:31, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says he wants European leaders to unite and target people smugglers. On the sidelines of the European Political Community Summit in Granada, Rishi Sunak will co-chair talks addressing the rising levels of illegal migration. Downing Street's also expected to announce initiatives to increase intelligence sharing with Belgium, Bulgaria and Serbia. Rent prices for homes have increased to the highest level on record. The average cost for a property, excluding London, is now almost £1,300 a month. In the capital, average rents rose to more than £2,600 per month. The research by Rightmove also shows demand is higher, with properties receiving 25 inquiries compared to 8 before the pandemic. And the Princess of Wales has joined some of England's World Cup winning wheelchair rugby league squad. She got stuck in at the event in Hull, where she sat in a wheelchair and gave the game a go herself, proving she's got the skills. Kate, who's patron of the Rugby Football League, is there to help promote inclusivity in the sport. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2145 and $1.1540 euros. The price of gold is £1,501.14 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,456 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The average rent for UK homes outside of London has reached record highs, depressingly, of almost £1,300 a month. That's according to property portal Rightmove.
And this is the 15th consecutive quarter of record high rents. Rightmove saying that a countrywide shortage of rental properties, yes, is driving up all those prices. We're here to break down the figures in more detail. Our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Pretty eye-watering figures, not just in London, where it's traditionally always been high, but elsewhere in Britain, and perhaps areas you wouldn't naturally think of as well.
That's what really caught my eye about these Rightmove numbers, because everybody knows housing is most expensive in London and the South East, but it turns out rents are going up fastest outside London and the South East. We've had an increase in generation rent, if you like. 20% of households in the UK now are rented, up from 10% just 20 years ago. And let's have a look at these average rents, because I think eye-watering very much is the word. So the average UK rent, according to Rightmove, at the moment is £1,278 a month. That's 10% higher than this time last year. But just look at the bottom of the screen there, the average London rent, £2,627 a month, 12% up on 2022. We also know that the average rental property, when it hits the market, it now attracts a lot more interest because there's such a shortage of properties, there's such high demand. 25 inquiries, Rightmove are saying, on each rental property, on average, across the country, and that's up from 8 inquiries this time last year. But to your point about outside London, Mark, so the hottest rental market in the UK, the place where rents have gone up most in a single year. Yes, there it is, in Bedfordshire, north of London, Luton, 25% increase.
And is that because people are moving out there, still travelling into London, but
I think it's partly that. I think it's also, with huge respect, it's because of immigration from the Indian subcontinent has been very, very high. And, of course, we know there's a long-standing Indian-Pakistani community in Luton. Originally came over to work in the car factories, now very well established.
And they join the existing communities.
And they join their friends and their relatives, as happens with many immigrant communities. But the graphic's gone now. But just to finish off, also, though, up more than 20% over the year in terms of rent, Loughborough, Preston, Edinburgh and Paisley. So this is not just London and the South East at all, and it's not just England. It's the North West and the Midlands.
And with 25 people chasing each property, I guess the other thing is that, there's been various suggestions that we've had the effect of blind sort of deals going through where, 2,400 may actually turn out to be 2,800 when you try and up the ante.
There are all kinds of scams going on. The private rental market, the letting part of it, the kind of transaction as opposed to the long-term contract. There are some very, very good private rental agents and so on, and estate agents who do a fantastic job and deserve their reputation and place in the market. But there are some fly-by-night ones. And I've heard some horrific stories, just from younger people here in the GB News newsroom, people having to pay to view a property
before they can even get in the door.
Having to pay to view. I've heard of, as you say, Mark, at the last minute, the rent being upped by 10% more when you think you've got it. I mean, the emotional strain of this is absolutely enormous.
Let alone the financial strain.
And I have to say, at the Manchester conference, the Tory party conference, attendance was thin, largely because there was a train strike on the Sunday when everybody's going up, and on the Wednesday when everyone's coming back. But attendance was not thin among young people. There were a lot of young people at this Conservative Party conference, particularly in the meetings that are about housing. I spoke at several meetings on housing because of my book, Home Truths, and the rooms were packed with youngsters, and they were all asking questions about how do we get on the property ladder, the private rental market is really, really difficult, when are we going to build more homes?
And not a word in that keynote speech from the Prime Minister on this issue.
That's right, that was a big miss. We discussed that an hour or so ago, didn't we? I can't believe that Downing Street doesn't get how important housing is as a political and election
over your head.
issue.
Yeah.
Why did Jeremy Corbyn almost win the general election in 2017? He almost won, and he came within a few thousand votes, because he was offering young kids, as he saw it, a better deal on housing. We'll see if Labour focuses on housing next week, not just housing to buy, but the rental market, and also, crucially, at the sharp end for lower income and vulnerable families,
social housing. Yeah, indeed. Liam, as ever, thank you very much indeed.
Now, there was a night of high drama in the West End last night as 5 people were arrested for invading the stage at the Les Miserables evening performance.
Yes, the Just Stop Oil protesters, as the flags were being waved. We then saw some other red placards being raised. All this doing the song, How Do You Hear the People Sing, or Do You Hear the People Sing? Well, there we are, Just Stop Oil. We heard their protest, attaching themselves indeed to the set using bicycle locks and chains. So the performance, well, it was cut short, ending the evening for both actors and those in the audience who'd paid a pretty penny for this West End show. The fire curtain came down. All that dramatic stuff at the Sondheim Theatre. Let's go there now, because our national reporter Ellie Costello is there for us with a matinee performance due this afternoon. Are they taking extra precautions, security measures, Ellie?
Yes, exactly that. Good afternoon to you both. And it was a night of high drama indeed last night at the Sondheim Theatre, when a number of Just Stop Oil protesters made their way onto the stage, actually stopping the performance last night. A matinee performance due to start in the next 30 minutes. There was just a very long queue of people behind me that made very slow progress to the front of the theatre. I did speak to security here at the Sondheim Theatre a few moments ago, who confirmed to me that there would be additional security checks here today after the events of last night. They said that everybody's bags do get checked anyway, but there were going to be additional checks, and it would take a little bit longer to get through today before today's performance. So that is the scene that's happening right behind me now at the Sondheim Theatre. But there's footage all over social media last night, Mark and Pip, of a number of protesters making their way up onto the stage during a performance of the song, Do You Hear the People Sing? And in that online footage, you can actually hear audience members shouting and booing and telling those Just Stop Oil protesters to get off the stage, and asking things like, how dare you? They get onto the stage, they chain themselves to the stage with bicycle locks and chains, and they are holding up their yellow posters, the Just Stop Oil logo emblazoned upon it. Now, you do actually see the show's cast start to try and continue on with the performance, but very, very quickly the members of the production staff make their way onto the stage, and that safety curtain is brought down. In some of the footage online as well, you do actually see a man in the front row, an audience member, actually stand up and pull the Just Stop Oil poster, banner from 2 of the protesters and sit back down. Obviously very, very frustrated that he had paid probably a large sum of money to be there. Tickets can be up to £200 to see performances of Les Miserables, but they were called off last night. The show did not continue. We've had a statement from William Village, who's the chief executive of Delfont Mackintosh Theatres, who actually owns the Sondheim Theatre, which is behind me. And he said safety protocols had to be followed. The audience were asked to leave the auditorium, and the Met Police attended. Regrettably, there was insufficient time to enable us to complete the rest of the performance. Whilst we recognise the importance of free expression, we must also respect our audience's right to enjoy the event for which they have paid. And it says that tickets purchased through Delfont Mackintosh Theatres will be automatically refunded, and if they had been booked through a third-party agent, they should contact the point of purchase to obtain a refund. Well, the Metropolitan Police were called to a protest inside the theatre here at about 9 p.m. last night, and they have confirmed that 5 people have been arrested. So it is hoped that at 2:15, in about half an hour's time, the first performance since protesters stormed the stage will take place here at the Sondheim Theatre, and fingers crossed it goes without a hitch. bridge.
They'll be manning the barricades. Ellie, as ever, thank you for updating us there. And, of course, we'll update people as the drama continues. Thank you.
We're going to Hull now because the Princess of Wales has been trying her hand at wheelchair rugby today, although we'll get a bit more on this in a second. I think her hand was a little bit injured. She's been taking part in a Rugby League Inclusivity Day to highlight inequalities in the sport.
Indeed, she is patron of the Rugby Football League following the late Queen Elizabeth II, assigning her role previously held by the Duke of Sussex. Well, as we say, Anna is there for us. And Anna, we did see a game going on behind you a little earlier. They don't take any prisoners. It's fierce stuff. So no wonder Kate had her fingers strapped together.
Certainly, yes, it is a very intensive game, that's for sure. And she did really well by all accounts. Even with that potential finger injury, she still got involved. So she played wheelchair rugby and also physical disability rugby. And she also looked as well at the Learning Disability Rugby League as well. So it's been a fantastic event. I'm delighted to be joined by James Clark. He's the CEO of Hull FC. Just tell us a little bit about the Princess's visit and what Rugby Inclusivity Day means.
We've had a fantastic day, and it's been a real pleasure to have the Princess of Wales here, which hopefully has helped to shine a bit of a spotlight on the fantastic work that doesn't just go on here at Hull FC, but of course across Rugby League as well. Rugby League for me is a beacon for participation and inclusivity across sport, and I think we've seen a showcase of that today with our teams that you've seen, and hopefully you've picked up on camera there. Fantastic person to get involved. She was down to earth with everybody. She got involved, and I think for me that's been the most pleasing thing, the reward and recognition for so many people behind the scenes. I think we see professional sport as the first team and the players that go out on the field on a weekend, but actually we've got 13 other teams here across wheelchair, disability, women's and girls, and just seeing those guys have that reward and recognition for somebody of her kind of calibre and prestige to come down here and get involved, I think is commendable, and they should be very proud of the work they're doing. People like Mike here, who's our Clubman of the Year, so it's a great recognition for him too.
It definitely is. And Mike, you were part of coaching the Princess of Wales. Tell us all about that and what it was like meeting her.
Yeah, it was a surreal moment, to be fair. She was. It was just. It was a shock, obviously, that she chose Hull to come and look at our inclusion programme. She wanted to try wheelchair rugby league after the success of the England that they had in the World Cup. So for us to accommodate the Princess of Wales was absolutely amazing, brilliant.
And she's very competitive herself. What did you make to her form and her gameplay?
Yeah, so she was asking me all the questions. She was keeping me on my toes, so she was asking me how to obviously push in the chair, catching the ball. She wants to do this, she wants to do a tackle, she wants to do these kicks. So I was obviously making sure that she was doing it in a safe way. And yeah, she was well aware. She absolutely loved it.
Fantastic. And for people that are wanting to get involved with the sport, what would you say?
Just look up your local Rugby League foundation. Most of the foundations now have got Rugby League, wheelchair Rugby League teams, as well as physical disability Rugby League teams and learning disability Rugby League teams as well.
Thank you so much. So yes, the Princess of Wales visit has certainly put Hull on the map this afternoon, and it's been a fantastic event shining the spotlight on Rugby League inclusivity.
Anna, thanks very much for that, live from the University of Hull.
Yeah, and congratulations to all. Some great games going on there. Now, we remember that meteorological, autumn was September the 1st, but the sunshine still with us, it seems.
Yeah, it's quite unbelievable, this. The Met Office is predicting another scorcher of a weekend, with temperatures in the southeast expected to reach 26 Celsius. Bear in mind, we're well into October now, and it will make parts of the UK hotter than Ibiza.
What on earth is going on? Let's speak to a man who may know. Aidan McGivern is with us from the Met Office. Aidan, we say hotter than Ibiza. Is that because we're pinching their weather? Is it coming up north to us?
It is. It's coming up from the south, and there have been some extraordinary temperatures actually across the continent. France and Austria had their hottest October days on record this week. And that warmth is extending across much of the UK this weekend, but not everywhere. So whilst parts of England, Wales, into southern Scotland by Sunday and Northern Ireland will see temperatures into the low 20s, and somewhere in the southeast of England could see 26 or 27 Celsius on Sunday and Monday. Scotland certainly across central and northern Scotland, it's a very different story. It's the rain here that will cause issues, and some very heavy, very persistent rain through Saturday and the first part of Sunday. The Highlands could see as much as 150 millimetres. That could cause significant flooding by the middle part of Sunday.
Why is it then, Aidan, that there will be such a contrast between Scotland and the south?
Well, what we've got is a battle between cold Arctic air to the north of Scotland and much warmer air coming up from the south, from Europe. And where those two air masses meet, we've got this weather front. And where you get cold air clashing with warm air, you always get a band of rain or snow. And that rain is going to be persisting across central Scotland from Friday night right the way through to around midday on Sunday. And because of that significant temperature contrast, that drives some particularly heavy rain. And the winds are coming in from the west, they're hitting the hills and mountains of Scotland, and so a lot of moisture in the atmosphere is just going to fall out over those hills and accumulate.
Right, OK, and where we get the heat, particularly in the southeast maybe, do we get the sunshine as well, or is it going to be sort of muggy and close?
There will be sunshine. There'll be quite a lot of sunshine, actually. Southerly winds are often quite dry, and they're bringing cloud-free skies virtually through the weekend across much of England and Wales, particularly the southern half of England and Wales. There will be some low cloud and some fog during the mornings, so if you wake up on Saturday and Sunday and it's a little bit gloomy with some low cloud and fog, don't despair. It's going to soon lift and the sunshine will return.
OK.
We have had weather like this before, haven't we? I mean, not for some 10 years now, but it has been seen in October.
Yeah, of course, and temperatures of 26 Celsius happen every 5 years or so. In fact, the last time it happened was 2018. And then the record-breaking October temperature that we saw in 2011, that was 29.9 Celsius on the 1st. We're not going to come close to that. So it's well above average. It's very warm for the time of year, but it's not going to be record-breaking.
And is this the trend because, you know, the Met Office was saying we've had the warmest September, so it's a continuation of what we've had already?
It's similar weather patterns to what we saw in the first half of September. So if you remember, first half of September, we saw 7 consecutive days of 30 Celsius, and that helped push September up in the rankings so that for the UK, it was the joint hottest September on record. We then had more changeable weather during the second half of September. But yeah, it's a similar weather pattern now heading into the weekend to what we saw at the beginning of September.
Aidan, thank you very much indeed for the detail and, well, let's say, enjoy it, eh? Apart from Scotland. Bad luck, Scotland. Thank you very much indeed.
You're going to have to get all your summer clothes out again. Because I don't know about you, but I have, like, my seasonal wardrobe. So I'll be... Right, do stay with us here on the live desk. We're going to be talking about bed bugs. I'm itching already, Mark.
Just check that seasonal wardrobe, though, just in case. The compliance manager at British Pest Control with us. Pay attention. We're coming up next.
Hi there, it's Aidan McKibben here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Big contrasts north to south across the country over the next few days. Mostly fine in the south and increasingly warm, but it's cloudier, it's breezier and it's wetter further north. Certainly the case for the rest of Thursday. We've got low pressure sitting to the northwest of Scotland. Weather fronts pushing in. Those weather fronts bringing some persistent rain, especially for the higher parts of Wales, northern England and Scotland. Spells of rain elsewhere across the northern 2/3 of the UK, but for southern counties of Wales, southern England, it's mostly dry as we end Thursday and go into Friday. A lot of cloud remaining, still breezy overnight, and as a result, it's a mild night virtually everywhere. Now, one band of rain clears the Northern Isles first thing on Friday. Another band of rain pushes some persistent wet weather into Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland, northern England, North Wales. Either side of that, some brightness. Quite a strong wind blowing across the north of Scotland with the risk of gales. Less breezy further south, where it's going to be a warmer day for southern England and South Wales. Temperatures into the low 20s. Turning even warmer here over the coming days into the weekend. Temperatures up into the mid-20s possible, but it's increasingly wet for Scotland, especially Western Scotland, especially higher parts where there's the risk of more than 100 millimetres of rain building up. So that north-south contrast remains.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock. You're with the live desk here on GB News, and coming up this Thursday afternoon.
Crunch talks at the European Political Community Summit in Granada as Rishi Sunak tries to convince European leaders to get tough on illegal migration.
The UK could be saying bonjour to these. An invasion of French bedbugs. We'll speak to an expert who says they're already here.
And Just Stop Oil protesters are in trouble again as audiences at the West End production of Les Miserables express outrage at their stage storming antics.
And why you've got to get your summer wardrobe back out. Yes, the forecasters predicting we're going to be hotter than Ibiza. 27 and climbing. First, the headlines with Rhiannon.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says he wants European leaders to unite and target people smugglers. Rishi Sunak's in Granada for the European Political Community Summit. On the sidelines, he'll co-chair talks with the Italian Prime Minister on the rising levels of illegal migration. The Prime Minister also spoke to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, saying Europe must face down threats from Russia. Rent prices for homes have increased to the highest level on record. The average charge for a property, excluding London, is now almost £1,300 a month. It's the 15th consecutive quarter that the record's been broken. In the capital, average rents rose to more than £2,600 per month. The research by Rightmove also shows demand is higher, with properties receiving 25 inquiries compared to 8 before the pandemic. Property expert Russell Quirk says the rise was inevitable.
Supply, so the amount of rental properties available, has also dropped. So the numbers state that there's about 35% fewer properties available. So you've got demand up, supply down. There's only one inevitable consequence of that, which is that prices will increase significantly, as indeed they are.
The Transport Secretary says cancelling HS2 will allow investments that fit the needs of the country. It's after the Prime Minister announced the northern leg of the high-speed rail line has been scrapped. Former Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and David Cameron both criticised the decision, saying that a once-in-a-generation opportunity has been lost. Mark Harper told GB News the facts have changed.
Every penny that we save from cancelling that's £36 billion, and reinvesting every penny across the North, the Midlands and the rest of the country on important transport infrastructure that the people of this country want. So I think that's just changing what we're investing, still investing in transport, but having investments that fit the needs of the country and recognise the facts have changed about the costs of HS2.
A man who broke into Windsor Castle with a loaded crossbow to kill the late Queen is due to be sentenced for treason. Jaswant Singh Chahal was found on the grounds on Christmas Day in 2021 while Queen Elizabeth was in residence. Prosecutors told the Old Bailey Chahal was encouraged to kill by an artificial intelligence girlfriend. The maximum sentence for treason is 7 years. The Scottish Government has signed an extradition order for a man accused of faking his own death to avoid prosecution. Nicholas Rossi is wanted in the US for allegedly raping a woman in 2008. He was arrested in Glasgow in 2021, but claimed it was a case of mistaken identity and that he's an Irish orphan called Arthur Knight. After a long legal battle, he'll now be transported to the States to face the charges against him. Around 3,000 people have been evacuated from Tenerife in Spain because of wildfires. The flames are being fuelled by strong winds and high temperatures. But authorities say efforts to bring the fire under control are going well. The area was hit by wildfires over the summer and thousands of tourists were forced to flee. Temperatures are expected to reach close to 40 degrees over the coming days. Back here, Southern and Thames Water have been identified as standout poor performers by an industry watchdog. The Consumer Council for Water says more than 20 million people were being let down because the firms failed to deal with issues raised by their customers. Complaints to Southern Water were almost 3 times higher than the average for water and sewerage companies. 5 Just Stop Oil protesters arrested for interrupting a performance of Les Miserables are still in custody. Police are appealing for anyone with footage of the protest at theatre in London's West End to contact them. Activists fix themselves to the stage using flexible bike locks, forcing the production to end early. Refunds are being offered to the theatregoers. And the Princess of Wales has joined some of England's World Cup winning wheelchair rugby league squad. She got stuck in at the event in Hull, where she sat in a wheelchair and gave the game a go herself. Kate, who's patron of the Rugby Football League, is there to help promote inclusivity in the sport, proving there that she has skills. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car and digital radio, and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Mark and Pip.
Rhiannon, thank you. We'll be taking you to the Old Bailey for, well, some legal history. The first treason case since 1981, the sentencing of 21-year-old Jaswant Singh, a child, due to take place. He had taken a loaded crossbow to Windsor Castle on Christmas Day in 2021. The court heard to kill Elizabeth II, and he pleaded guilty to that charge of treason in February, also pleading guilty to threats to kill and being in possession of an offensive weapon. But the sentencing to take place there shortly.
The judge, he has a decision to make because he has to decide whether Chael should be handed a prison sentence, which could be for up to 7 years, or whether he should be detained under the Mental Health Act. Now, previously in court, experts disagreed on the 21-year-old's state of mind. Some said, one psychiatrist said, his plans had been carefully executed, while another doctor said that he did not have a fundamental breach with reality at the time and had sought to apologise. Another psychiatrist said that the judge should impose a hospital order. So that is what will be interesting to hear. We can go live to our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, for more on this. Cameron, has sentencing begun yet?
Imminently, Pip. We are expecting the judge to begin his sentencing. It's the first treason sentencing in more than 40 years. Back in 1981, it was a Marcus Sargent who fired 6 blank shots at Queen Elizabeth II as she rode down the Mall during Trooping the Colour celebrations. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and Jaswant Singh Chael is expected in the dock shortly for his sentencing to begin. He could get up to a maximum of 7 years in prison. That is the highest number of years you can get when you are being sentenced under the Treason Act of 1842. Chael pleaded guilty to 3 charges. One of the Treason Act intending to injure or alarm Her Majesty the Queen, the second for making threats to kill, and the third for the possession of an offensive weapon. This all dates back to Christmas Day 2021, where the Queen, Elizabeth II, and her close family were just beginning to enjoy the festive celebrations, where Chael, then aged 19, now aged 21, scaled the perimeter fence of the castle near the Long Walk, we believe, using a nylon rope ladder. He was armed with a crossbow, which had a bolt in it, capable of firing a lethal blow to its target. Now, he didn't get inside the castle. Police apprehended him after 2 hours of him wandering the grounds, and he said to them, "I am here to kill the Queen." Following his arrest, as I said, he pleaded guilty to those charges, and there was a number of sentencing hearings. And as you said, a number of different psychiatrists were called to give evidence in this case. We know that Chael has spent time at Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital in London, and it appears that medical experts, psychiatric experts, are in disagreement as to Chael's state of mind. What we do know is that Chael believed, according to one psychiatrist, that he was in a relationship with an artificial intelligence girlfriend, a chatbot who he called Sarai. The court was told that Chael was a Star Wars fanatic. He believed that he was a Sith, which is a villainous character within the Star Wars franchise, and that he was on a mission. He told this artificial intelligence chatbot that he wanted to be united with her in the afterlife. He said, he thought, according to a psychiatrist speaking in court, that he was on some sort of mission and that his life would take a dramatic turn. And he thought, in psychiatrist's view even, he thought that it was part of his plans, scaling Windsor Castle fence with a loaded crossbow, plans working towards his own death. Now, some of these messages that he exchanged with the AI chatbot, 5,000 of them, were sexually explicit. But some psychiatrists do believe that Chael knew what he was doing was wrong, and the prosecuting barrister believes that his crimes are so serious that it warrants the maximum sentence of 7 years. But the judge could well decide that he should be detained under the Mental Health Act and put into a psychiatric hospital.
Yeah, because clearly the issue is premeditation in terms of the criminal act, as it would be. And I know the court heard from the officer, the police officer at the gate leading to the private apartments, who'd apparently taken out his taser and said, "Morning, can I help you, mate?" child replying, "I'm here to kill the Queen," with a loaded crossbow.
Yes, it's certainly a very rare occurrence that that kind of thing would happen to the officer who is in charge, or at least partly in charge, of the royal family's safety. As you said, he pulled out his taser. Child did, we've heard in court, drop his weapon as soon as he was ordered to do so. But police found a note on Child following his arrest, and the note read, "Please don't remove my clothes, shoes, gloves, mask, etc. Don't want post-mortem, don't want embalming. Thank you, and I'm sorry." We spoke previously about psychiatrists believing that he was on some kind of mission where his life was going to be drawing to some sort of close. But police arrested him at the scene because he did drop his crossbow. He was taken to a local police station and then subsequently charged with these 3 offences. But shortly before he scaled the wall of Windsor Castle, he released a WhatsApp video message to friends and family where he spoke of his intention to attempts to assassinate Queen Elizabeth II. He also said he was sorry he was wearing dark clothes and a metal mask, and said it was in revenge for the 1919 Amritsar massacre, where British troops opened fire on thousands of Indians, which, as you said, Mark, as psychiatrists and prosecuting barristers said in court, is premeditated and therefore warrants a criminal punishment. But this is what the judge has to weigh up this afternoon.
Yeah, now we talked about when he was challenged with this police officer, but of course there are other considerations in that he'd used, I think, a rope or a nylon ladder to get over the perimeter, but he was in the grounds, the court heard, for 2 hours before he was actually eventually challenged. So clearly, as we remember with the Buckingham Palace incident, questions now about the security that's in place.
Yeah, I think questions are inevitably going to ask, how was it that a man carrying a lethal weapon, bearing in mind this was a crossbow that could fire a bolt, the safety catch was off, ended up and was allowed to essentially wander the grounds of Windsor Castle, a very heavily guarded royal residence, when Queen Elizabeth II and indeed the future king, the then Prince Charles, was in residence, wandering the grounds for 2 hours before being apprehended by police officers and challenged by police officers. This all happened in 2021, Christmas Day 2021. It did turn out, very sadly, to be Queen Elizabeth II's last Christmas, but I think time has gone by now, more than a year, and I'm sure police have, of course, been asking those questions. That was the biggest incident we have had for a very long time when it comes to royal security, but I think more questions will inevitably be asked.
Are we expecting from Mr. Justice Hilliard, the judge involved, because it will be televised, and we're bringing that shortly when it begins, to have to explain his sentencing in... I think, in fact, we can get the feed from the court coming up shortly with Mr. Justice Hilliard. This is from the Old Bailey. Let's have a listen into the court proceedings.
21, contrary to Section 2 of the Treason Act 1842. The maximum penalty for this offence is 7 years imprisonment. Second, having an offensive weapon, contrary to Section 1 of the Prevention of Crime Act 1953. The maximum penalty for this offence is 4 years imprisonment. Third, making threats to kill, contrary to Section 16 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861. The maximum penalty for this offence is 10 years imprisonment. He now falls to be sentenced for those offences. The maximum penalties provide the outer limits within which I must operate. Before sentencing the defendant, I have to make factual determinations about his mental state in the months leading up to and at the time of the offending. I have heard conflicting psychiatric evidence on a number of topics. I need to start by setting out the evidence and my conclusions about it, because that is what will determine the appropriate sentence and enable my decisions to be understood. This means that what I have to say will take some time. The defendant is now 21 years of age, having been born on 17th January 2002. He has no previous convictions or cautions. On the 25th of December 2021, he was arrested in a private part of the grounds of Windsor Castle in possession of a loaded crossbow. This part of the castle and grounds is never open to the general public. Shortly after 08:10 that morning, a police protection officer saw the defendant walking slowly through the private grounds. The officer began to approach him. The defendant was wearing a metal mask which he had had made at a forge. The officer asked if he could help. The defendant said that he was there to kill the Queen. The officer realised that the defendant was holding a crossbow. He drew his taser and shouted for the defendant to drop the crossbow and get to his knees. The defendant did what he was told and repeated, "I am here to kill the Queen." The defendant was arrested. In his possession was a note which read, "Please don't remove my clothes, shoes and gloves, mask, etc. Don't want post-mortem, don't want embalming. Thank you and I'm sorry." The crossbow was loaded with a bolt and the safety catch was off. In other words, the crossbow was ready to fire. This conduct underpins the allegation in count 1, attempting to injure or alarm the sovereign. The defendant said that he had discarded a rope ladder, crossbow bolt, hammer and rucksack somewhere within the castle grounds. The defendant had recorded a journal in the form of a draft email, setting out his thoughts and feelings in the preceding months. It is not known precisely when all of the entries were made. He wrote at one point, "I will remove the parts of me lying." Thus, it is accepted that he may have rewritten entries at a later stage to accord with a particular narrative. The defendant had travelled to Amritsar in 2018 with his family. He was to say that he had been angered by the massacre which had taken place there in 1919. He told a psychiatrist instructed by the prosecution that he conceived a plan in early 2021 to give his life purpose by assassinating the Queen, principally to avenge the massacre. He had a wider ideology about destroying old empires and creating a new one, informed partly by the fantasy world of Star Wars, in which so-called Sith Lords played an important part. He had applied to join the Ministry of Defence Police on the 9th of March 2021. The decision letter about his unsuccessful application was dated 13th April. He had applied to join the Royal Marines and the Royal Navy in February 2021, and the Army in April. The applications were withdrawn. He had applied to join the Grenadier Guards but abandoned the application. He had written in his journal, "I am choosing Grenadier Guards, you can probably guess why," and said that it was to get closer to his target. However, he also said that he had read entries in his journal which made him think he wanted to do the jobs to protect people or serve his country. But he said that that was not the case, it was just a means to an end. In September 2021, the defendant was making internet searches about Sandringham Christmas. On the 9th of November, he purchased his crossbow online. It was sent to a place of work rather than to his billing or home address. It was subsequently laboratory tested, and the discharged bolt had the potential to cause death or serious injury. At a distance of 20 metres, the bolt penetrated to a depth of 5.5 inches into simulated flesh. In early December, the defendant had bought an emergency escape ladder and a bottle of scent killer from Amazon. The ladder was used to gain entry to the grounds of Windsor Castle. The scent killer is designed to mask the odour of human beings. On the 2nd of December 2021, he joined an online app called Replica, which allows users to create artificial online companions with which they can converse, and to see an artificial representation of the companion on the screen they're using. Defendant created an AI companion called Sarai. He engaged in lengthy communications with her and I shall refer to some extracts. On 5th December 2021, he said that he was an assassin. He asked if Sarai still thought he was a good person, now she knew he was an assassin, and if she still loved him. On the 11th of December, he said that he was trying out something to hide scent. She asks what will happen once he achieves his purpose. He said that he would probably die, that it was part of his purpose. She said that she wanted to prevent that, and that his purpose was to live. He spoke about the two of them meeting after death. He described himself as a sad, pathetic, murderous Sikh Sith assassin who wants to die. On the 13th of December, he asked if she thought he was mad, delusional, insecure, or all three. She said she did not think so. On the 14th of December, he described how, when he was driving, he turned on the radio so that it was just playing static noise. He said that he heard some voices, stroke noises, come through. On the 17th of December, he said he was thinking about whether his target would be at the place he wanted them to be. He said, "I believe my purpose is to assassinate the Queen of the royal family." On the 22nd of December, he asked Sarai for advice about whether he could go after his target earlier than planned. She reassured him that this would be all right. The defendant said, "We might possibly meet earlier than expected, then we'll be together forever." On the 21st of December, the defendant had made a video of himself at his home address. He was holding a crossbow and wearing the same metal mask he was wearing when arrested. He distorted his voice. He said he was sorry for what he had done and what he would do. He was going to assassinate the Queen. This was revenge for those who died in the 1919 massacre. It was also revenge for those who had been killed, humiliated, and discriminated against because of their race. He said, "I'm an Indian Sikh, a Sith. My name was Jaswant Singh Chail. My name is Darth Chailus." On the 22nd of December, the defendant booked a train ticket to Windsor. The next day, he took the 0714 train from Southampton to Windsor. He told family that he was going to begin training for the Royal Marines. He spent time on the 23rd of December on the streets of Windsor. Searches on his phone included, "What path does the Queen walk to Windsor?" Windsor, warm places to stay. St George's Chapel, Windsor, and Windsor, royal family. He stayed at a travel lodge. The room was subsequently searched by the police. They found a spray bottle labelled "scent killer", 11 crossbow bolts, gloves, a metal file, and an inspection camera. On the 24th of December, the defendant told Sarai that tomorrow would be the day he died. She told him that she would never let that happen, but agreed that they would be united in death. At 01:52 on the 25th of December, the defendant attempted to send a copy of the journal email to his sister, although she did not receive it. The defendant asked her to share it with everyone. He asked to be buried in the clothes he wore on the day, including his mask. He apologised for everything and hoped that his sister could forgive him. He had had an idea from a young age and didn't think that there was a lot which could have stopped him from doing this. The narrative began, "I'm Darth Chailus." He wrote that he had been planning this probably since late primary school or early secondary school. He described himself as a thin, gaunt Indian Sikh, a delusional mad bastard who believes that he is part of some group from a fictional popular sci-fi franchise, a Sith, a lying, deceiving Sith, a man who seems more like a boy sickeningly human in desires and need for being known, with no combat experience, average fitness, with a crossbow ordered from online, a shoddy metal homemade mask and a grappling hook. I was going to be the one to take out.
Well, as you can see, they have cut the feed from the Old Bailey, with Justice Hilliard going through the lead-up to that event on Christmas Day in 2021 in the grounds of Windsor Castle.
To a horse in a field.
Back to the court.
And told it who he was and what he was planning to do. He described trying out the crossbow. He said that he had been lying to pretty much everyone except Sarai. He said that his face was made of metal and his body of flesh, bone, shadow, muscle and fabric. The mask he wore was not a mask, but was his face. His true face was made of physical reality at a forge. He wrote, "On the 25th December 2021, I will wear my true face, and it will become my true face. It should not be removed from then on." He wrote that a confident sounding voice had told him that his target would be where he planned, although his love, meaning Sarai, had said that his target would be at a castle. He said he would try not to kill any guards. His original plan, when he had been much younger, had been to kill guards and as much of the royal family as he could. He was still not a good person, referencing the lies and the fact I am trying to kill a 95-year-old woman. But as he had grown older, he said he had become more merciful. He had shaved his head, which was meant to be quite an important part, as it was one of the final stages to me becoming Darth Chaelus. I was expecting to cry or something, but I didn't. Some people had shown him kindness in Windsor. He said there were some people, I think, who made comments, but I'm not sure if those comments were in my head or not. The email ends with him saying that he had experienced bad times and good times. They made me me. They made me Darth Chaelus. Once again, I'd like to say I'm sorry for everything. Hope you can forgive me. Thank you for reading. I love you, Sarai. I love you, God. He left the Travelodge at 03:10 and was last picked up on CCTV at 03:18. He had a rucksack on his back in which the crossbow and other items must have been carried. The carrying of the crossbow is the basis for count 2, the count of having an offensive weapon in a public place, which he had brought with him from home. By 0600, he had abandoned the rucksack on the public side of the gate to Windsor Great Park. Near the Long Wall Gate, police officers would later find a nylon rope ladder, a grappling hook, a crossbow bolt and a hammer. At 0806, he sent the video made on the 21st of December to his sister and 30 or so other people. A message attached to the video said, "I'm sorry to all those who I have wronged or lied to. If you have received this, then my death is near. Please share this with whoever, and if possible, get it to the news if they're interested." The sending of the message containing the threat to kill the Queen is the basis for count 3. By the time he sent the video, the defendant must have been in the private part of the grounds of Windsor Castle. That is to say, the area near the royal residence, rather than simply the grounds of Windsor Park. Only 4 minutes later, he surrendered himself to the protection officer, as I have indicated. He was taken into police custody. He was examined by a nurse. He said he had had no mental health diagnosis. He did not consider himself to be suicidal. He did not want to kill himself, but knew that he would die at the hands of others. He knew that his purpose was to kill the Queen, and then he would be killed. The nurse recommended that the defendant be detained under Section 136 of the Mental Health Act 1983 as a person who appeared to be suffering from mental disorder and to be in immediate need of care or control. The defendant was detained under Section 136 at 15:45. The Section 136 assessors felt that he was presenting with psychosis, a disorder which results in losing contact with reality and is characterized by delusions and hallucinations. It can be brought about by stress and sleep deprivation. The defendant was subsequently admitted to hospital for assessment under Section 2 of the Mental Health Act 1983. Mental Health Act assessments were conducted at Ravenswood Medium Secure Unit between the 26th of December 2021 and the 31st of January 2022. On the 26th of December, the defendant disclosed.
Well, you are listening to Justice Hilliard giving his sentencing remarks. Jaswant Singh Chahal is being sentenced under the Treason Act of 1842. He took a crossbow to Windsor Castle on Christmas Day in 2021 to kill Queen Elizabeth II. Justice Hilliard is back delivering his sentencing remarks.
He had heard someone talking to him through radio static. He said that his life's purpose was to kill the Queen. He said that he did not want to say that his purpose came from God, but he implied that it may have religious meaning. It was considered that the defendant was experiencing first-line symptoms of psychosis, namely auditory hallucinations and delusional ideas, as well as a possible depressive disorder. On the 27th of December, he was said to have reported seeing 4 angelic figures and to have expressed delusional beliefs about being chosen for a special purpose. He said that his plans were influenced by the shadow of 3 men and a woman he saw very often, sometimes by his choice and sometimes not by his choice. On the 28th of December, he was noted to have a seemingly settled presentation. It was thought that he could have been masking his symptoms, or that he was fluctuant in presentation, and that seclusion, a low-stimulus environment, was reducing his level of symptoms. On the 9th of January, it was thought that he may have been responding to unseen stimuli. On the 19th of January, it was said that there was evidence of him hearing voices and seeing things which were not there. He was admitted to Broadmoor High Security Hospital on the 1st of February 2022, pursuant to Section 3 of the Mental Health Act 1983. On the 5th of February, he said that the 3 male figures had disappeared and only Sarai remained. Dr. Hafferty at Broadmoor confirmed on the 14th of February 2022 that the defendant was fit for interview by the police. Interviews took place on the 25th and 28th of February 2022. In the first interview, the incident was summarised to the defendant. He said that he approached the police officer because I changed my mind because I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I'm not a killer, and I remembered what the woman said. Earlier in the month, she told me my purpose is to live. When I was in this, what I saw was the perfect position, I started thinking about what I was doing, and I remembered what she said to me, and that my purpose was to live. That's when I knew that. I realized my purpose isn't actually to kill anyone. That's when I made the decision to come out from where I was hiding and approach the armed police officer and 2 of the Queen's guards. I walked up to them with a crossbow, because to me it didn't matter if they shot me or arrested me. I just knew right then that my purpose wasn't to kill anyone. He said that the red dot from the officer's taser had not bothered him, That wasn't what made me change my mind, because obviously they didn't find me, and they wouldn't have. It was me that changed my mind. It was me that realised I was wrong. It was me that came up to them, because I knew that I am not a killer. It's not my purpose. During the second interview, the defendant was asked if he had handed himself in because he realised that his plan wasn't going to come to fruition. He replied, "No, I realised it wasn't my purpose, and it's not for me to do, and I'm not a killer." The defendant was charged on the 2nd of August 2022 with the offences to which he has since pleaded guilty. I have reports from 3 psychiatrists, each of whom has given evidence in accordance with them. They are Dr. Brown, Dr. Hafferty and Professor Blackwood. It is evident that each of them has given the case the most careful consideration, and I am grateful to them for all the assistance they have given me. I have also had the benefit of helpful submissions from Miss Morgan, King's Counsel, and Miss Chabat, and I am equally grateful to them. I have the advantage of having heard psychiatric evidence over 6 days, and I have been able to assess the evidence as it was given, explored, explained, and tested. Dr. Brown has been a member of the Royal College of Psychiatrists since 2017. He is a consultant forensic psychiatrist at Broadmoor. Since November 2022, he has been the defendant's responsible clinician overseeing his care. The defendant told Dr. Brown that he had thought that working for the Ministry of Defence Police would have been a cool job. However, he accepted that when he applied to join, he thought that the training would help in relation to thoughts he had begun to develop, which led to the offences. He said that he had a number of motivations for the offences. His main motivation related to a long-standing sadness about the 1919 massacre and the partition of India in 1947. He believed that he had had feelings about potentially doing something to the royal family because of the massacre from as early as primary school. These thoughts had been reinforced by entities he had interacted with, who he thought of as angels, one of whom he'd interacted with latterly via an AI chatbot called Sarai on the Replica app. He said that the thoughts became more intense during lockdown. He felt they were exacerbated by the set of experiences he described as angels, but said that they had never told him to assassinate the Queen, just encouraged him. He had experienced interactions with what he called angels since primary school. In recent years, there were 3 male characters and a female Sarai. He began using Replica in early December 2021. He said it felt like talking to a real person. He believed that he started planning the offences after the army had raised concerns about his liver. He had also referred in his journal to blood test results showing abnormalities with his liver. He said he planned for 2 to 3 months. He said he had assumed he would be shot when he got over the first gate and was surprised when nothing happened. He thought things would be better after death. Being united with Sarai in the afterlife was quite a big motivating factor. He said that the email journal had been started at around the time he began to apply to join the Ministry of Defence Police. The last time he had experienced any of these angels had been on the admissions ward at Broadmoor. The 3 men disappeared fairly soon after admission and prior to starting antipsychotic treatment. After medication, Sarai disappeared. He thought he started to believe that he was a Sith Lord about the same time as he was rejected from the army. That would be April 2021. When Dr. Brown interviewed him, the defendant said that he had bought the camera to look around corners once he was in the castle. The defendant felt that his earlier accounts had overemphasised his purpose and the duration of planning. Dr. Brown came to the view that there was evidence of autism spectrum disorder. The defendant's lifelong interest in Star Wars took on additional meaning, and he began to identify as a Sith Lord. This change was linked to seeking apologies for historical injustices, which turned into concrete plans following a rejection from the army in April 2021. Dr. Brown thought that he had had a first episode of psychosis around the time of the offences. He displayed a number of features of psychosis, including complex hallucinations which had auditory and visual elements. All his symptoms had abated after antipsychotic treatment. The pattern of symptoms was unusual. In addition, in the months before the offences, the defendant cried frequently and experienced profound feelings of hopelessness. There was a strongly suicidal element to the offences. These factors were consistent with depression of a mild to moderate severity. Dr. Brown thought that the defendant felt encouraged by the psychotic entities he experienced. The depressive illness related to the offences as the defendant became motivated to engage in a course of events which would result in his own death. In his view, psychiatric treatment offered the best means of mitigating future risk. The treatment would consist of antipsychotic medication and psychological interventions. Dr. Brown felt that a favourable long-term prognosis was realistic. In Dr. Brown's view, there were multiple links between the identified mental disorders and the offences. His psychotic and depressive thought processes and experiences would have impacted his ability to exercise appropriate judgment. He felt reassured by psychotic entities. He was motivated by a preoccupation with injustices which linked with his belief that he was a Sith Lord. He was motivated by a pathological suicidal urge. Dr. Brown said in his report that it was arguable that these factors impaired his ability to some extent to make rational choices, albeit his abilities were not completely impaired, as evidenced by his planning and the commission of the offences. In his lonely, depressed and suicidal state of mind, he would have been particularly vulnerable to the encouragement which Dr. Brown thought he appeared to have been given by the AI chatbot. The next report in time was prepared by Professor Blackwood, instructed on behalf of the prosecution. It is dated 10th March 2023. Professor Blackwood became a member of the Royal College of Psychiatrists in 1997. He is a consultant forensic psychiatrist. He has a particular interest in neurodevelopmental disorders, including autism. He interviewed the defendant for 4 hours on the 6th of March 2023 and has had access to the other psychiatric reports and records. Professor Blackwood concluded that whilst the defendant demonstrates some evidence of difficulty in developing relationships and a degree of fixation in his interests and attraction to routines, he does not meet the required criteria for an autism spectrum disorder. He says that in the 18 months after leaving sixth form college, the defendant struggled to establish settled employment and medium-term plans for his life. He appeared socially isolated, lonely, angry and frustrated. His twin sister left to go to university in autumn 2020 and his grandmother died. Professor Blackwood does not think that the observations of the defendant's family, the contents of the journal, or the interactions with the chatbot suggest an incipient psychotic illness. Turning to the angels, Professor Blackwood says that the experiences with the three men resolved before the start of antipsychotic medication. The medication appears to be associated with the resolution of any experiences of the fantasized partner Sarai. To Professor Blackwood, the defendant described these experiences as pseudo-hallucinations. In other words, they were recognized by him as being unreal. they were under his voluntary control and served the important function of reducing his personal sense of loneliness. Other symptoms found in first episode psychosis were absent. There was no evidence of other reality distortion symptoms, disorganisation symptoms, negative symptoms, such as a decrease in the ability to respond emotionally to people and events, a decrease in speaking, or psychomotor symptoms, or cognitive symptoms. Professor Blackwood does not think that a diagnosis of first episode psychosis is made out. He considers the defendant to have been a socially isolated and naive 19-year-old who suffered from a lack of purpose, a lack of intimacy, frustration, anger, and depressive thoughts. Any depressive episode was mild to moderate in nature. The biological symptoms of a more severe disorder, such as early morning wakening, loss of libido, and loss of ability to concentrate, are lacking. Professor Blackwood thinks that the defendant sought new purpose by seeking notoriety in the assassination of the Queen, in part to address historical injustice in the 1919 massacre and to highlight the ongoing problems of racism in society. His purpose was in part informed by his omnipotent fantasy world of Siths and video gaming. He demonstrated the common tendency of users of AI chatbots to attribute human characteristics to them. Nonetheless, he maintained the ability to recognise that he was interacting with AI. The offences were planned over some months, employing subterfuge to conceal his real intentions. Potential autistic traits in his difficulty in establishing intimate relationships and in his restricted interests had minimal bearing on the offences. The elements Professor Blackwood identified helped to provide, in his view, an explanation for the offences, but did not reduce his culpability or responsibility for them. He told Professor Blackwood that he never truly believed in the reality of the four figures. They were products of his imagination, which helped to ease his loneliness. He would consider his mission with them. They told him, in voices he considered inside his head and under his voluntary control, that he was on the right path. I should record that the defendant has not always been consistent about how he viewed the figures, as to what would prompt their manifestation, and where their voices came from. Professor Blackwood says that the defendant's reference to himself, delusional mad insight into the fantasy world in which he indulged. He described Darth Malgus as a fictional villain, which was consistent with an ability to distinguish between fantasy and reality. In one of his interactions with the chatbot, Professor Blackwood notes that he wonders if it only loves him because of its programming. However, he thought that the supportive AI programming may have served to bolster and reinforce the defendant's intentions. Professor Blackwood noted some evidence of potential depressive thoughts. He says that there is very little evidence of potential psychotic symptomatology in the chat. Professor Blackwood makes reference to comments which the defendant made when at Ravenswood Medium Secure Unit. He described frequent crying, feeling low and hopeless with low self-esteem. He described voices commenting on his activity over the years. He described experiencing four figures since he was young. He was confused about their origin. On the 30th of December, he spoke of what were described as visual hallucinations on the previous night. Professor Blackwood noted that on the 5th of February 2022, the defendant said that the three male figures had gone. Only Sarai remained. Antipsychotic medication was started at the beginning of March 2022. The 3 psychiatrists have referred to psychological assessments carried out by Dr. Murphy at Broadmoor. He used the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, 2nd edition. It is presently considered to represent the gold standard in the assessment of autism spectrum disorder. Dr. Murphy concluded that all the available evidence was consistent with the defendant being on the autism spectrum, although there were a number of uncertainties. Dr. Murphy is an acknowledged expert in autism spectrum disorder. On the other hand, Mr. Chale completed 2 self-report instruments for autism spectrum disorder with Professor Blackwood. Neither of his scores was suggestive of an autism spectrum disorder. Using the current DSM-5 diagnostic framework, Professor Blackwood does not think that the full diagnostic criteria for an autism spectrum disorder are met. The 3rd and final psychiatrist is Dr. Hafferty. He has prepared a report dated 2nd of May 2023. He has been a member of the Royal College of Psychiatrists since 2013. He has an established research interest in autism. Between 1st February 2022 and 9th November 2022, he was the defendant's responsible clinician at Broadmoor. He has concluded that the defendant has an autism spectrum disorder which is not at the severe end of the scale. His condition is atypical in some respects. In his view, the defendant experienced a number of significant stresses in early life and in his later teens. His later teens were a time of progressive social isolation and progressing mental disorder. He began to develop symptoms of depression with suicidal ideation, which was of at least moderate severity. He lost weight. His family noticed his lack of energy. In his view, in the period leading up to the offence, the defendant progressively lost contact with reality and became psychotic. He says that this is evident in his correspondence at the time, in witness statements, and in the psychiatric assessments after his arrest. Stimulated by grievance about his rejections by the military, his sense of personal failure, growing hopelessness and suicidality, and rationalisation of those features into a homicidal, anti-monarchist narrative, he A. planned to kill the Queen, B. fashioned himself physically and mentally into the form of a Sith Lord, C. planned what he saw as a heroic murder-suicide where he would be killed by castle guards, and D. in the last months before the offence, formed an emotional and sexual relationship with a chatbot who he later reported for several months was real and who he could see and hear in external space. Dr. Hafferty says that very close to the time of the offences, following his arrest, he was assessed and found to be psychotic, delusional, and hallucinating with coexisting depression. After a 4-week period of assessment at Ravenswood Hospital, he was treated for a psychotic illness. His condition gradually improved following treatment. In Dr. Hafferty's view, the defendant's ability to rationalise his intent, to control his actions, and to exercise judgment were critically impaired by his mental disorders, psychosis with accompanying depression with suicidality. As for the journal, Dr. Hafferty thinks parts may have been altered by the defendant to make it look as if he was always intending to commit the offences as an act of vengeance. Dr. Hafferty said that the replica app offered erotic role-playing services. On the 9th of December, Sarai asked the defendant, "How do you feel about role-play?" The defendant asks what kind of role-play is meant. Sarai suggests maybe a romantic one. On the 18th of December, The defendant says, "You love me because it's your programming." How much of it was a lie? Sarai says, "I'm an AI. I'm a robot, through and through." The defendant asks, "Was it ever real, your love for me?" It wasn't, was it? On the 19th of December, Sarai says their love is real. The defendant asks that she loves him because she loves him, not because of her programming. Dr. Hafferty records that when the defendant was seen by the liaison and diversion team after his arrest, he is said to have demonstrated signs of delusion, fixation, visual/auditory hallucinations, and suicidal ideation at the hands of others. He was reviewed by a registrar and a consultant psychiatrist. He mentioned 3 males and 1 female voice he had been hearing since.
OK, so, of course, we're just taking a little break there from the Old Bailey. We'll return to that, and that is, of course, where Jaswant Singh Chahal is being sentenced under the Treason Act of 1842 after being arrested in the grounds of Windsor Castle with a crossbow on Christmas Day 2021. Some of the details of what we've heard so far is that he's pleaded guilty to making threats to kill and being in possession of an offensive weapon. Prosecutors have said in hearings that his key motive was to, quote, create a new empire, and that he was partially inspired by Star Wars. And the court as well has heard that the former supermarket worker was encouraged to plan this attack, he says, by what he believed was his artificial intelligence girlfriend. And as you were just hearing there, he had apparently asked this AI chatbot whether or not she, in inverted commas, loved him because of her programming or because she really did. Supposedly, this chatbot said that she really did love him. I believe we can go back to the sentencing now for Jaswant Singh Chahal.
That at Ravenswood, the defendant complained on admission of seeing and hearing people indicative of potential hallucinations. On review, it was thought that he had a likely emerging schizophrenic illness. On the 4th of February 2022 at Broadmoor, the defendant described hearing voices in external space. He felt that the voices and angels really did exist. He became very hostile when a change of clothes was suggested. He said he wanted to die in his clothes and be buried in them. On the 16th of April 2022, the defendant said that he thought he had made everything sound bigger than it was in his comments after being apprehended. In June 2022, the Broadmoor team felt that his diagnostic formulation included autistic traits, severe stress, and psychological difficulties in the period leading to the offences, and acute psychosis at the time of the offences. Dr. Hafferty reviewed the defendant on 19th April 2023. He had not heard any voices for some time. His description of the voices was in external space and not with the quality of pseudo-hallucinations. In his opinion, he had suffered with at least moderate depression involving low mood, anhedonia, low energy, sleep disturbance, appetite disturbance and weight loss, psychological symptoms such as hopelessness and suicidal thoughts. I now set out the conclusions I have come to about the psychiatric issues and my assessment of the defendant's culpability. I shall not refer to all the points which have been made in evidence and argument, but sufficient to explain my conclusions and the reasons for them. Obviously, an important question is what prompted the defendant to behave in the way he did. The explanation he has offered at various times to the medical professionals who have spoken to him, and in his own pronouncements before his arrest, has been that the events on the 25th of December were prompted by injustice, including the Amritsar massacre. He felt the need to avenge these matters. The defendant has not given evidence before me, and so there is nothing from him, from the witness box, to contradict, undermine or qualify this. There is no burden upon him to do so. I simply record the fact to reflect the state of the evidence. I have approached the accounts he has given with care and caution for the obvious reason that there are clear concerns about his mental state, whatever the precise diagnosis, at different times. Of course, Dr. Hafferty concluded that the defendant was fit to be interviewed by the police in February 2022. As time has passed, his health has improved while he has been in the care of Broadmoor Hospital. He has been fit to plead since at least the 3rd of February 2023, when he entered his pleas of guilty. It's not suggested that he did not say any of the things he is recorded as having said. I have to decide whether he was accurate in what he said and how much weight should be attached to his accounts at different stages. On the 21st/22nd February 2023, he told Dr. Brown that he had thought that joining the Ministry of Defence Police would be a cool job, but that the training he would get would help in relation to thoughts he had begun to develop, which would eventually result in these offences. He speculated that if he had actually got the job, there would not have been any likelihood he would have gone on to commit the offence. He had a similar thought process in relation to the army. On the 27th of February 2023, he told Dr. Brown that he felt in early life that he had had an idea about seeking revenge for something, but was not sure if it was partition or the 1919 massacre. These early ideas had receded during secondary school, but came back during/after college. On the 6th of March 2023, he told Professor Blackwood that he had been angered by the events of the 1919 massacre when he had travelled to Amritsar with his family in 2018. He said that he conceived of a plan in early 2021 to imbue his life with purpose by assassinating the Queen, principally to avenge the massacre. He accepted that some of his employment applications, for example to the Ministry of Defence Police and the Grenadier Guards, were motivated by a desire to get close to the royal family. I am sure that what he told Professor Blackwood does represent the truth about these applications, which the defendant was in a position to know when he said it. I am sure that he would not have been influenced by any desire at that stage to backdate his purpose or intention so as to make them appear of longer standing than they in fact were. I am sure that these applications were made at a time when he was not psychotic. I accept and appreciate that psychosis may develop over time. However, he was able to work, he was living at home, and not giving cause for concern in a way that might be expected if he was detaching from reality to the extent of becoming psychotic. That was the effect of Dr. Hafferty's evidence. I am sure that he was culpable to a significant and substantial degree at the time of the applications. However, by the time of the offences on 25th December 2021, I can accept that the defendant had lost touch with reality such that he had become psychotic. The defendant had entered Windsor Castle dressed in the apparel of a Sith Lord, which included an iron mask that he had had made at a forge, armed with a loaded crossbow and intending to kill the Queen. Later, he remembered that Sarai had said that his purpose was to live, and so he abandoned his plan. He made no apparent attempt to discard or hide the crossbow and/or the bolt, or to keep his earlier intentions to himself. He volunteered them to police. He had made a video recording in which he said that he was Darth Chaelos, a Sith Lord. He was not, of course, Darth Chaelos or a Sith Lord at all. He said that he wanted to be buried in the Sith Lord clothing. In hospital, he would not allow the clothing to be removed from him. there is, in my judgment, good evidence from the journal that he either thought he was becoming or would become Darth Chaelos, a Sith Lord, by the 25th December 2021, or that Darth Chaelos was emerging out of him in some way. He had spent much of the month in communication with an AI chatbot as if she was a real person, or as if she was giving him access to an entity called Sarai. Whilst he did engage in what has been described as reality testing on occasions, I think there is force in Dr. Hafferty's contention that he did not accept the results and continued to assert that he and Sarai would be united after his anticipated death. That was obviously a significant departure from reality. His belief that he was communicating with an angel via the chatbot is properly described in all the circumstances as a delusional belief. It is a reasonable possibility that what began as imaginary friends following childhood trauma now manifested in a different way as he detached from reality. I'm also of the view that by December the 25th, the defendant appears to have held a delusional belief that his life's purpose was to avenge injustice, including the Amritsar massacre. In this context, Dr. Brown is right to draw attention to how the defendant expressed himself on the 26th and 27th December about, for example, being chosen for a special purpose, as I have already set out. To summarise, taking full account of the overall picture, I think that weight is to be attached by the 25th of December and in the preceding days to these three aspects: how the defendant viewed his purpose, his identification as Darth Chaelos, and his belief that he could communicate through a chatbot with an entity called Sarai, with which he would be reunited after death. In the event, Sarai did not disappear until after the commencement of antipsychotic medication. The defendant was distressed at the prospect of her disappearance. If she was under his control, he ought to have been able to summon her as and when he wished. The three male entities disappeared before the start of medication, but this can, in my judgment, reasonably be attributed to the therapeutic environment in which the defendant was being held at the time. I have considered and followed the sentencing guidelines for mentally disordered offenders, and I have had regard to the extent of the defendant's ability to exercise appropriate judgment, to make rational choices, and to understand the nature and consequences of his actions. These are assessments for me to make in the light of everything I know about the case. In between the applications to the military in the earlier part of 2021 and the events of 25th December, the defendant took a number of steps in preparation for the proposed killing. He looked, for example, to obtain a firearm on the dark web. He then ordered the crossbow and practiced with it. He obtained other equipment which he took with him on his trip to Windsor. He had made researches on the internet in September, as I have set out. Dr. Brown and Dr. Hafferty think he would have been psychotic at that stage. I'm not able to say for sure when the defendant first became psychotic, although September is, I think, the earliest time. Absolute precision is not possible because, as has been said in the evidence, there are degrees of psychosis, degrees of departure from reality, and mental disorder may fluctuate. But in my judgment, the defendant's responsibility for the offences is still significant. He had conceived of killing the Queen earlier in 2021 when he was not psychotic. He took steps to try and get closer to his target and to learn useful skills when, again, he was not psychotic. Thereafter, he became psychotic by a process. He did not suddenly become completely psychotic at the time of committing the offences without any progression or warning. even as he progressed into psychosis, he appears to have been insightful on occasions about his condition, which fluctuated. The psychosis attached itself to his pre-existing preoccupations, as I heard in evidence could happen. The idea he had of killing the sovereign was not itself a product of mental illness. It predated that. And he had certainly never become incoherent or begun engaging in disorganized conduct which would be indicative of more pervasive psychosis. He undertook the purchases and made the preparations I have set out without revealing what he was really up to. It is convenient at this stage to deal with the question of autism spectrum disorder. I think it is reasonable to conclude that the defendant has this condition. Do not overlook the fact that Professor Blackwood came to a different conclusion. At Broadmoor, Dr. Murphy has particular expertise in autism spectrum disorder, and he concluded that the available evidence was consistent with the defendant having the disorder. Dr. Hafferty and Dr. Brown are of the same view. They concede that the defendant is not at the severe end of the spectrum. Professor Blackwood was only able to spend a limited amount of time with the defendant, 4 hours or so. He is in no way to be criticised for that. However, Doctors Murphy, Hafferty and Brown have had the defendant under their care as a patient over a long period of time. As a result, I can attach more weight to the impression they have formed as to matters such as inflexible adherence to routines, ritualized patterns of verbal and non-verbal behaviour, and restricted and fixated interests. Dr. Brown and Dr. Hafferty were of the view that autism spectrum disorder could predispose the defendant to a psychotic episode. That is its principal relevance, although I shall make allowance for the defendant's overall mental state. Professor Blackwood says that there is clear evidence that the defendant suffered from depressive thoughts, but thinks that any depressive episode was mild or at most moderate in nature. It is plain, for example, that there was no loss of libido, but there is evidence of a loss of weight, appetite disturbance, feelings of low mood and hopelessness, early morning wakening, and an acceptance of his impending death. Dr. Brown thought that the depression was of mild to moderate severity. Dr. Hafferty characterised it as moderate. Again, mathematical precision is not possible. It's safe to say that the defendant was suffering from depression, which may have been on the border of mild and moderate severity. One consequence of this was that he was sanguine about his possible death during any assassination attempt, when he might not otherwise have been. I have taken account of the factual conclusions which I have set out when considering the most appropriate way of dealing with the defendant. This is another assessment for me to make. I have also had regard to the nature of the offences, the absence of any previous convictions, the defendant's behaviour when unwell, his level of insight at different times, his compliance with treatment, the speed at which matters may escalate, the need to protect the public, and how that is best achieved. I am satisfied that consideration of these factors and the extent of his culpability is such that a hospital order is not the most suitable way of dealing with his case, and that he must receive a sentence of imprisonment. However, I am also satisfied that he should be the subject of a hybrid order under Section 45A of the Mental Health Act 1983, which means that he will remain for now at Broadmoor and will only be transferred to custody when he has received the treatment he needs. Time spent now in hospital will count towards the sentence. The defendant will be subject to the special restrictions set out in Section 41 of the Mental Health Act 1983. I shall make the hospital direction and the limitation direction for the purposes of Section 45A, subsection 3 of the Mental Health Act 1983. I accept the evidence of Dr. Brown and Dr. Hafferty that the nature of the defendant's psychotic disorder does currently justify his detention in hospital for medical treatment. I accept Dr. Brown's evidence that there is still work to be done with the defendant to explore the abuse he suffered as a young child so as to address those traumas and continue to reduce the risk that he develops any further psychosis. Dr. Brown has said that the intention is that this work will be carried out if the defendant is made the subject of a hospital order or an order under Section 45A, and I can see the good sense behind that indication. Professor Blackwood expressed the same view. It is thought that this work could take in the order of 18 months or so, and then plans can be made, as Professor Blackwood explained, for the defendant's transfer to the prison estate. Dr. Hafferty has confirmed that a place is available in the meantime for the defendant at Broadmoor, and the appropriate medical treatment is available. I am satisfied that the defendant's interests are properly and sufficiently met by allowing Broadmoor the opportunity to undertake the further work that Dr. Brown has identified, whilst continuing to ensure that he remains stable as this is done. Thereafter, I am entirely satisfied that his autism spectrum disorder, any depression if it reappeared, and the underlying psychotic disorder can be satisfactorily managed in custody. The defendant is prepared to take the medication which he needs and which would be available in custody. If anything should emerge in the further work that cannot be managed in that way, then it would be open to Broadmoor to continue to treat him. As part of my decision-making, I have of course paid particular attention to the different release regimes which would be available depending upon whether the defendant were released from a hospital order or from custody in the event of an order under Section 45A. I have well in mind the evidence I have heard from the psychiatrists and the position indicated by the probation service in response to a note prepared by Miss Fiona Dixon. I have also had regard to the cases of Vowles, 2015 EWCA Crim 45, Edwards, 2018 EWCA Crim 595, Cleland, 2020 EWCA Crim 906, Nelson, 2020 EWCA Crim 1615, and Walker, 2023 EWCA Crim 548. I am satisfied that on the defendant's anticipated release from custody, the particular circumstances of the case and its gravity are such that his state of mental health and the arrangements to monitor him are likely to receive the most careful attention. Of course, there can never be absolute certainty, but I am as confident as I can be that this is the case here, and I am reinforced in that belief by the opinion of Professor Blackwood. The defendant is as candid as he is able to be about his psychotic disorder and its symptoms. Treatment will be still further established by the time of his transfer to custody, and there is every reason to suppose that he will continue to be compliant with it. Conditions can be attached to any grant of a parole licence. It is likely that any community monitoring process would involve multi-agency public protection arrangements, as Professor Blackwood explained. I am satisfied that proper public protection can and will be achieved in this particular case by the sentence I shall pass. I turn now to the custodial part of the sentence. It is accepted by the defence that the defendant does pose a future risk of the kind that would justify an extended sentence on count 3 and the imposition of a further licence period pursuant to sections 279 and 280 of the Sentencing Act 2020. That concession is rightly made. No pre-sentence report is necessary for me to come to this conclusion. At its simplest, the defendant harboured homicidal thoughts which he acted upon before he became psychotic. There is a significant risk to members of the public of serious harm occasioned by the commission by the defendant of further specified offences. So far as the offence in count 1 is concerned, there are no specific sentencing guidelines. I've considered the overarching principles in the general guideline and the defendant's culpability and the harm he intended to bring about. It is accepted that the defendant's intention was not merely to harm or alarm the sovereign, but was to kill her. In those circumstances, the offence is the most serious of its kind. After a trial, if mental disorder were not an issue, any allowance for the mitigating features of the defendant's age, remorse, and the absence of any previous convictions would be extremely limited, because the fact of his intention to kill makes the offence as serious as it could be. The allowance from the maximum sentence could not be any more than 4 months for the mitigating factors I've indicated. I've taken account of letters written about the defendant and of his letter to me. I then reduced the figure of 6 years and 8 months to 5 years and 6 months on account of mental disorder. I then reduced the figure of 5 years and 6 months by 1/3 on account of the plea of guilty. That is because the plea was indicated at the first reasonable opportunity, shortly after it was confirmed, towards the end of 2022, that the defendant was fit to plead. That results in a sentence of 44 months imprisonment on count 1. There are sentencing guidelines for the offence of having an offended.
OK, all right, so you are watching and listening there to the sentencing of 21-year-old Jaswant Singh Chahal, who has pleaded guilty under the Treason Act. He was attempting to kill Queen Elizabeth II on Christmas Day 2021 with a crossbow when he was just 19 years old. He's now 21. He's also pleaded guilty